Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
This all happened last summer when me and my childhood best friend, we were both 15, decided to go camping for her birthday. We were originally supposed to be a 5 to 6 person group, but it ended up being just the two of us. So we met at her grandma's house, me with my scooter and her with her mom in a car, and headed to our camping site for the next 2 nights. The camping site was very deep in the woods beside a public trail, but there were still neighbors who had a lot right next to the one we were using. My friend's mother warned us to not go take a walk on the left side of the trail, which would lead us to the weird and possibly dangerous neighbors. We obviously listened since we didn't want any trouble at all. So after unpacking most of our stuff, her mother left, letting us alone in the middle of the woods with only a 50cc scooter to get out in case of emergency, which, don't get me wrong, is very useful but not very fast. So we started doing our thing, eating junk food, listening to music, catching up on both of our lives, since we haven't talked in a very long time. She moved away a few years prior to this, so we don't get the chance to talk to each other that much. The sun was slowly going down. It was getting darker and darker. We were talking and singing when we heard an ATV coming on the trail. It was coming from the left side. Me and my friend freaked out a little, so we basically just locked the door and ran to the back of the camper. The ATV stopped on our camping site. We could hear 2 adult males talking to each other about whatever knows what. It took something like 5 minutes, but they finally left. At this point, we weren't that worried because we thought it was just some curious people who wanted to know if there was anyone in the camper, which had already been robbed in the past, so we just continued our stuff, listening to music and all. By this time, it was already dark outside and the moon wasn't out yet, leaving us with no other lights than our candle. There was no water and no electricity in the camper, which also meant we had to go outside to use the bathroom. Fortunately, it was a full moon night, so eventually the moon would come out and we will be able to see outside pretty well. So again we were talking, everything else was quiet, no music, no animal noises either, and then we heard an ATV coming our way once again, so we turned out all the candles and stopped talking, waiting in silence. We quickly sat on the ground of the camper to make sure no one could see us from outside because the curtains were still opened, and then we listened. The ATV stopped a little before coming up to our camping site and everything went silent. A couple minutes after that, we could hear footsteps all around the camper. Yes, it could have been an animal, but with the ATV sound and what happened after, we know it wasn't an animal. The steps eventually faded away. We then quietly moved to the back of the camper, closing every curtain, making sure the door was locked. We brought 2 knives with us. We eventually heard another noise. We immediately went silent and we hid the candlelight. We then heard the noise again. It was like someone was trying to open the camper door just by turning the handle. We then heard footsteps going all the way around the camper, and we could hear the person testing every single window to see if any of them were opened. We were almost crying. After they tested all the windows, the steps faded away with maybe 1 hour of tranquility and silence, during which we were quite panicking. When we finally calmed down, we heard noises at the door once again, but this time, it sounded more like someone was trying to unlock the door with the lockpick. We could hear the lockpick inside of the mechanism, and then the person would try to turn the handle. After 5 minutes of trying, the person probably got mad and started turning the handle angrily and punching and kicking at the door. We were freaked out. I had my brand new iPhone in one hand, hesitating on calling the cops or no. No service was available at this location, but 911 can still work most of the time. The noise was still going on at the door and all around the camper. This lasted for at least 30 minutes. The person was trying every window and then at some point gave up once again. We then started to make up a plan. The noise at the door happened a couple more times. We acted as if we were more than 2 people in the camper, so we started acting like my friend's mother and sister were there, as if one of our guy friends was there, and we acted like the noise woke us up and we screamed at the people to go away, and we got mad. Our plan worked, I guess, since we heard multiple people running away. The next morning, after making sure everything was okay, we got out of the camper and we saw that a bunch of the plants next to the camper had been stepped on. There were footsteps everywhere in the mud and everywhere around the camper. Since it was daytime and my friend's mother was supposed to come back to see us, to make sure we were okay, we decided to sit outside waiting for her. We were walking around waiting when a car slowed down in front of our campsite. It never stopped, but we saw the driver staring at us. Then maybe 10 minutes later it went by again and again and again, always giving us that menacing stare. When my friend's mother finally arrived, we asked her if anyone tried to prank us or make a joke, and she went on and asked every possible suspect, and no, it was not a prank. Everyone promised that if it was them, they would have told us, but it really wasn't them. We didn't sleep alone this time. We had someone else come sleep with us for the second night. I'm just glad they weren't able to open the door to the camper. So I'm 23 now, but when this happened, I was 17. In my last year of high school, I was the art girl. I was working on my portfolio so that I could apply to art school. I mainly did landscapes, but part of the requirement for our portfolios was life drawing. Obviously, my high school didn't have any life drawing classes, so my art teacher linked me up to a life drawing class at a local university, which is one of the top art institutions in the UK. So for my school, I had to get a half-hour bus to the center of the city, and then walk maybe 15 minutes up a long stretch through the student district. It was a 6-week course, and this happened the 5th week. The class was really interesting, and I learned a lot since this was my first time working with life models. I was pretty confident and not too worried about walking alone at night. The class finished at maybe 9 p.m. and it was pretty dark by the time I got out. So 4 weeks walking there and back, uneventful. 5th week walking there, totally fine. 5th week walking back to my bus stop, also totally fine. 5 minutes at the bus stop, it was very freaky. So the stop I had to wait at was outside the expensive private school in my city. There's a strip with about 4 bus stops and it's also pretty busy. So busy that people don't even see what's happening right in front of them. So I must have been one of the first people there, so I'm standing just outside the shelter because I'm smoking, and obviously I don't want to be a jerk and make other people breathe in my smoke. So there's only about a few minutes left till my bus, and I'm minding my business when this guy comes and stands super close to me. Like, not as in infringing a bit of my personal space here close, like literally I can feel him standing against me. He must have been in his 40s and just had that general creepy vibe and looked really grubby. So obviously I'm a bit freaked out and sidestep away. So does he. I look at him and he has the creepiest smug grin. But at this point I'm like, okay, he's trying to freak me out and he knows I know. I step away again, like fairly far away this time. He follows me again and is literally standing with the front of his body dead up against the back of mine. Honestly, I do not know how nobody noticed this or called him out. We were outside the shelter and it was dark. People are on their phones or their own conversations. I guess it must have been just that. I literally just froze in the moment, even though there were people around who would have helped. I don't want to overreact, maybe it's just a misunderstanding. I don't want to seem rude. So anyway, it gets worse. After dodging this creep for a few more moments as time dragged in slow, finally this bus comes around the corner. I know if I get on this bus before this guy, he is going to sit next to me, which is what I want to avoid. So politely I gesture and say after you. He gives me that creepy look again and says no, you go first. I insist but he refuses again. There's a big queue now and I don't want to hold anyone up, so reluctantly I get on right before this guy. I get on the bus and do the only reasonable thing, which is to sit next to an old lady right at the front of this empty bus. The seats are only in pairs, so there's no way he could sit beside me now. Like I said, this bus is almost empty, so where does he sit? In the seat directly behind me. I'm just sitting trying to ignore him, which is pretty difficult to do when this guy keeps leaning forward and literally playing with my hair. I have really long hair and his hands are on it. I pulled out my phone and tried to text my mom, but the sending bar would just stick. It happened to literally every time I tried to message her. Obviously, I was scared to call her. I didn't want him hearing what I had to say. I messaged my friend and told her what was happening and that I thought that if I got off this bus, the guy would most definitely follow me. I still had a 10-minute walk home after I got off this bus up a long straight road, so my friend calls my mom and tells her what's happening. My mom then calls me and relays what my friend had told her. Now, I'd been on this bus for about 15 to 20 minutes and my stop was coming up in 5. It's not a big city. My area is suburban and I don't know everyone, but I think I recognize most. I'd never seen this guy before. He wasn't local to my area, so I reasoned he had definitely been on this bus longer than his stop. Anyway, my mom called. I just said to her, I will be getting off this bus in 5 to 10 minutes. You need to get to X Street now and meet me. As soon as I said that, the creep pushes the button for the next stop. Literally as soon as I say it. He stands up and makes sure to bang into my arm and drag his body hard across me as he walks past, stares at me from the door and through the window as the bus drives away. I'm not 100% certain if he actually had bad intentions, or if he just got off on a 17-year-old girl who was on her own. The fact he pressed the button as soon as I confirmed someone was meeting me makes me think he did intend on following me. I didn't go to the final week of that class. This happened this past year, my senior year of undergrad. I attend a big university with 2 bus stops. The first one is for a smaller portion of the school, and the second one is the main one that people use, but they're pretty far apart. I got out of class and was next to the small bus stop around sunset. This guy, I'll call him Eric, comes up to me of all people in line and starts asking if this bus would take him to one of the student housing areas. It was kind of odd because it was partway into the year, but whatever, he seemed genuinely confused. I explained yes, this bus would take him there and his stop is the same one I get off of. He asked if he can wait in line with me and he was nice, so I said sure. We're talking and waiting for the bus, and it doesn't come, so I decide to walk to the main stop and he follows. Again, at this point it's not creepy because it's just small talk. We walk to the other bus stop and we just jump on one over there. Eric sits next to me and is berating me with questions that I'm now answering very shortly. Then everything he says is flirty, like, yeah, come see my pool so we can tan, let's work out together and get sweaty in the sauna. All very weird and random, and I just don't say much because everyone on the bus can hear the conversation. He then asks for my number, which I lie about, but this guy says okay, let me call you. Obviously, I get a call and Eric's just confused and I just say oh my bad. I knew he would call it again, so I just gave the right number. Now I'm regretting telling him I stop, but I still get off with him. He's continuing the flirty comments, but the street I'm parked on is opposite of his route home. I say goodbye and wait till he's out of my sight and to get in my car and drive away. At this point it's late and he was gone, so I just went home and forgot about it. He texted me a couple times the next few weeks, all of which I ignored. Eventually he stopped and I forgot about the encounter. Fast forward a few months and I rarely use the bus anymore because I have a parking pass. One day after class I decided to go to the Vons right next to my original bus stop. I park in the farthest row because it's very busy and my car is in the middle of the row. I'm on a quick mission, so I'm rushing down the first aisle and some guy turns around to check me out, but I ignore it and keep going. I felt the guy's eyes on me still and thought, how do I know this dude? Then I get in line and there he is at the front of the line grinning at me. It's Eric from the bus and I'm like, screw this, so I switch lines. He checks out way before I do and leaves. I get my stuff and walk out to my car. I was parked just far enough that you couldn't see my car, just the direction it was in. As I get closer, there's Eric standing right in front of my car. This was disturbing because he wasn't waiting at the door of the store or in the middle of the lot. Nope, right at my car. He positions himself in between me and my car and he's grinning and he says, I know you. I play dumb saying sorry, you must have me confused. He says, no, you're from school. I say no, that's not me, I don't go to that school. He believes me and starts aggressively asking me out. I say no thank you, I have a boyfriend. He says, okay, so you can't have friends? And I look at him and say sarcastically, do you really want to just be friends? He just grins at me and replies no. He then says, don't worry, when you're single I will find you. The way he said it was very unnatural and creepy. He finally gets out of my way and lets me into my car. He watches me leave the parking lot and I drove to my brother's house just because of how unsettling that encounter was. On one occasion, I came from a group project and had to take the bus. It was crowded when I got on, so I sat in the first seat I saw. I can hear the conversation behind me and instantly recognize Eric's voice. The girl he was talking to seemed to be really into the conversation surprisingly. But now here I was on a bus to a school that I told this creep I didn't go to. I tried to get off quickly, but somehow Eric and the girl got off before me. I'm relieved and try to keep a distance. I don't see them anymore and turn a corner and there he is again waiting for me. He doesn't move though, he just grins at me and says, hi, are you going that way or this way by now? He used my real name and the fake one I used when I played dumb at Vons. I just walk away and call my friends to meet on campus. The shelter in place was issued the next week and I moved home. Luckily I never have to see Eric again. This story is from my days as a gas station clerk. This happened during a football Saturday, so the store was full of people from the moment I walked in. Most of the night is a blur because it was just cashiering for the first 6 hours of my shift. It was around 3 a.m. and things were finally starting to taper off. There were only a dozen or so people in the store. I just usually kept my head down and focused on the transaction in front of me so I wouldn't get overwhelmed, only looking up now and then to make sure the store isn't on fire and no one's stealing the wine case. I wasn't even looking around when I saw him. I just saw something strange in the corner of my eye and spun my head to look at him. When I got a good look, I was startled. This guy's skin was almost translucent white and he was soaking wet. His teeth were gritted and looked too big for his mouth. He was shaking as fast as he walked past the counter. I could hear the bathroom door slam from around the corner. I went back to my transaction and told myself that I needed to remember exactly where he was. I couldn't forget he was in the bathroom. I rang out the next few people, watching for him the whole time. After another 10 minutes or so, the store was suddenly empty. Customer rushes tend to be like that, from 100 miles an hour to just nothing. I knew he was still in the bathroom. I thought about going to knock, but I felt repelled. I had no intention of going near that door. I look at the clock and it's nearing 4 a.m., which is when I need to start brewing coffee for it to be ready when my manager comes in. The coffee grounds are all in the supply closet behind the counter, so I tell myself it's totally fine to go get them. It satisfies both my paranoia and my arrogance as well. I'm still doing my job, but doing something I believe to be tactically the best move. If for whatever reason the guy opened the bathroom door and tried to run behind the counter and do something to me, I could shut the door and lock it from the inside. Besides, the bathroom doors are old and loud. I can easily hear them open from inside the closet, so I can just come out and wait near the panic button until he leaves. This all seemed like a very good idea at the time. So I decide to go get the coffee packets, and I'm listening carefully while I load up on all the flavors I need. I figure I will only be a minute or so I don't even turn the lights on. I'm listening carefully and I don't hear anything. I still don't hear anything. Then I hear a weird noise. It sounds like the water pipes in the back hissing at first, but it's too ragged. I suddenly realize the noise is breathing, and it's getting louder. Then it's right on top of me. That's when I stood and turned to leave, and saw him in the doorframe. We just stood there both staring back at each other. Later, when my manager reviewed the footage, she saw him leave the bathroom by slowly pushing the door open. Without making a sound, he had wandered behind the counter and peeked into her office, stepping in far enough to trigger the automatic light. After that, he had wandered behind the food service counter before making his way to the open supply closet door. The next thing she saw on camera was me flipping out. I stepped backwards, my body shaking so hard my knees almost buckled. At this point, I think he realized how absolutely horrifying this entire scenario was to me. He put up his hands and started apologizing awkwardly. He was really twitchy and still gritting his teeth. I basically went on autopilot for a moment and said I wouldn't talk to him until he got out from behind the counter area. He walked backwards until he was barely on the other side of the employees only entrance, standing next to the soda machine. He began asking for an iPhone charger, telling me he was lost. He said he had no money and just needed to charge his phone here until he could call for help. I told him I don't have an iPhone charger and I couldn't help him. He sighed and looked down for a moment, seeming to think about what to do. Then he flipped his head back and screamed as loud as he could. He then punched the soda machine, hard. I backed up and ran around the counter, up to where the panic button was under the register. I watched him as he walked around the store, punching the walls and kicking the counters and screaming. I heard myself shouting over and over, "Get out right now." After a second he stopped and turned around to look at me. He quietly apologized before wandering out of the store and running off into the dark. At this point I was shaking, but tried to pick up and keep working. I started brewing the coffee, checking the windows to see if he was out in the parking lot, but I couldn't see him. After another few minutes, a regular came in and told me a strange man had come up to him asking for a ride. He said the guy was soaked and his teeth were gritting. That's when I decided to call the police. They found him in the parking lot next door, screaming and punching the moving trucks. They took him to sober up and calm down. They informed me that he was very sorry for losing his cool and he was just very drunk and very lost. He had come from out of state for the game and got separated from his friends. In the end, nothing bad happened, but it made me realize that something easily could have. My skin still crawls thinking about this guy. He saw me shopping for school supplies and things for my new apartment one evening during my first week of grad school and decided I was his mark. I had just moved to my new college town, didn't even have a cell phone yet after leaving the one my folks paid for during undergrad behind. As I left the parking lot with my purchases, I noticed this truck pull up behind me at the exit. It was late and there weren't too many people out. I pulled out and so did he. It was a few miles down a long retail street with lots of stoplights before my turn. As I drove, I realized the guy in the truck was trying to get my attention. Over the next few miles, he kept trying to get me to look at him. Some red lights he would end up ahead of me, some behind or beside. At every light he positioned himself so he could stare at me, either directly or in one of his mirrors. His gaze was unwavering and my anxiety rose. He was driving oddly, speeding up close to my bumper, hitting his brakes when he was in front of me, swerving close to my car a couple of times. Finally, at a red light where he was beside me, I glanced over and absolutely started to panic when I was met with an unbelievably empty, unwavering stare. He saw that I was terrified and he was following me, and he was trying to force me to pull over. At one point I scooted through an intersection on a hard yellow a couple of cars ahead of him thinking I could shake him. Nope. He went around the cars at the light and ran the red and got back in front of me. A freeway entrance ramp came up and I tried to fake him out by putting on my signal and getting into the merge lane for it. He took the bait and started up the ramp. I quickly got out of the merge lane and continued straight. Again, I'd hoped to lose him, but he drove his truck down the embankment to keep following. At another light where he was beside me, I pulled through the light and then he turned at the last possible second. He made a U-turn and ran another red to follow me. My panic really ramped up at that point. With no cell phone, no sense of direction, in a new city, I really didn't know what to do. So I turned on some music and forced myself to sing along and forced myself to go to the speed limit so I wouldn't crash out of terrified stupidity. I decided to drive to the supermarket across town because I remembered it had a police station in it. He followed me all the way there. He burned out of the lot as soon as he saw all the cop cruisers parked out front. I filed a report and asked for a police escort home. I insisted because something told me this creep was waiting for me to leave the police station. He was. As soon as I pulled out, I saw him. I pulled over and told the officer following me and he went after him, but the truck had taken off and the cop couldn't catch him. The police got the surveillance video from the first store. It turned out this jerk had been dodging me the entire time I was shopping. I saw my surveillance footage following me through the store. I saw him follow me out, close enough to grab my elbow. I saw footage of him circling the lot in his truck, waiting for me to pull out when I took too long to unload my cart. My heart sank. I was able to remember 6 of 7 digits of his plate and the make and model of his truck. In the end, the cops did nothing. They said it was a he said she said since the surveillance video didn't catch him doing anything particular unlawful and was a losing case to try to charge him with anything. I ended up trading vehicles with a friend for a couple of months to try to feel safer and went on with my life. I had no idea what this guy did just a handful of months later until almost 15 years had passed. I was watching a Discovery ID show about the kidnapping and murder of Sandy Jeffers. I almost fell out of my seat when I saw the mugshot of her killer, Aaron Lee Skeen. It was him. I was so disgusted that law enforcement did nothing in my case that I tracked down the investigator in the murder case, and after verifying some things about his vehicle that were changed in the TV reenactment to weed out people making stuff up, she took my contact info and official statement. She could neither confirm nor deny that my run-in was with Skeen, but qualified her statement by saying at least you don't have to worry about him anymore because he got life without parole. I only wish something could have been done when he terrorized me. Perhaps things would have been different for Sandy. So yeah, creepy murderous stalker crazy dude, let's not ever meet again. I go for a short run every night, right after sundown, when it's finally cool out. I always take the exact same route, a loop through a quiet and sparsely populated neighborhood. And now I realize how easy of a target that's made me. A short section of the route passes by an unlit park. A couple of weeks ago, I'd seen a guy hanging out behind a truck that was parked next to the entrance, and it was so unusual to see someone else up there that I decided to be extra cautious, turn around, and head back home. I didn't get close enough to get a good look at his face. A few days later, I saw what looked like the same guy by the park again. I figured I was probably just being paranoid, but I decided to turn around again just in case. I hadn't noticed any activity by the park in the last several days, so I resumed my normal route and didn't even think about the guy I'd seen up there. Then last night, as I was passing by the park, I had this inexplicable feeling that I was being watched. I couldn't spot anyone nearby, but the park extends into pitch black darkness, so someone could easily hide there unseen. I decided to just keep running, look confident, and try to hurry past the park as quickly as I could. Suddenly, I smelled a strong wave of cologne in the air that immediately put me on edge, and I'm pretty grateful he was wearing it so it tipped me off. After I smelled it, I had no doubt in my mind that there was somebody nearby, but still, I didn't see any movements in front or on either side of me, and I was afraid to turn around. Immediately past the park, there's a bend in the road. There's a house on the corner as you turn down the road. The house has lots of tall bushes in the front yard. I normally run right past those without even thinking of it, but since my gut instinct was blaring like a siren, I quickly moved to the middle of the street as I rounded the corner. I shot a glance behind me to see if anyone had actually been nearby. I saw a man slowly walking through the front yard of the house on the corner, looking towards me. He paused behind the bushes, as if trying to remain hidden. I could see his jeans and a pair of black-white sneakers, but little else. His slow footsteps were so creepy that I can't get the image out of my mind, as if he was trying to be quiet as he could. If I hadn't made the split decision to run into the middle of the street and away from the yard, I would have been within grabbing distance. I turned on the flashlight on my phone, aimed it right at the bushes hoping it'd startle or blind long enough for me to get some distance between us, and started sprinting at full speed down the road. It was probably the fastest I've run in my life. At the end of each block, I glanced behind me to check if the man was there. Fortunately, I lost sight of him. If he decided to sprint after me, I'm not sure what I would have done. From what I could make out, this guy was at least a foot taller than me. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had dissipated and I was shaking with fear. I couldn't sleep at all that night. What scares me most about the whole thing is that I'm 99% sure this was the same guy I'd seen hanging out in front of the park recently. And now I can't shake the idea that he'd been watching me and calculating the right time and path to try to sneak up behind me. He knew that I always ran past there around the same time. The thought that he was probably watching me from the darkness in the park last night before quietly moving out of it and starting to follow me makes me sick. Needless to say, I won't be running past the park at night anymore, or running alone at night, period. The terror I felt when I turned around and saw the guy's shoes slowly moving behind the bushes and his head facing me is like nothing else I've felt before. I live in a small town, the kind where almost everyone knows each other, and it also really creeps me out to think that this might have been someone I've seen around town in the past. Part of me wishes I could have gotten a better look at his face for the police report. I've had a stalker for over 2 years. I, a 27-year-old female, have worked with people with disabilities since I was 19. I was born with a rare genetic condition, and have been using my experience to help other people with disabilities in my community. When I first started working with the organization, I was working with my best friend's older brother, her older sister, and several of her aunts, uncles, and cousins. so in the beginning I always felt safe. Essentially, they would do anything to keep the creeps away from me that would appear from time to time. However, after several years, all of my close friends slowly started leaving. Flash forward to a couple of years ago, when most of my closest friends were all gone, leaving me one of the most experienced and senior staff members, including all of the management and the board of directors. I've had a lot of bad experiences in these past 2 years, with the stuff stated above, but the worst part has been the lack of support from management. So, within the last few years, a client that we'll call Leonard, a 50-year-old male, started to chat with me at community events. We often have parties or events that we invite the entire community to. From the very first moment I met Leonard, I experienced chills creeping up and down my spine. Something about the way he looked at me has always made me super uncomfortable, to the point that I will do literally anything to get away from him, including helping folks in the bathroom. He's a really short guy, with shocking white hair and these clear blue eyes that are just empty. He's always really smiley and soft-spoken. He started off innocent enough. He would corner me at parties and talk until I found a reason to slip away, but at some point, he managed to get my personal cell phone number from a coworker, still don't know who, and started calling me late at night and leaving long rambling messages. I never answered the phone, and after a while, he stopped. He would still periodically call me though, despite me asking him politely in person to stop. He started cornering me in the office too, when no one was around, so I had a difficult time getting away from him. Every time he cornered me, he would grab my arm or shoulder so I couldn't leave. More recently, like right before a lockdown, he'd start calling the office and leaving messages on my work phone after hours. He wasn't even someone I personally worked with. I asked my coworker who did work with him to please ask him to stop, which she did. She spoke to him several times, but he would only ever stop for a week or two, and he always made a point to come and apologize directly to me, which almost always made me more uncomfortable. It started to get really bad about 3 weeks before I started working from home. He would forget his appointments, which were purposely set on the one day in the week when I wasn't working in the office. He would come in the next day when he knew I was working. Then he figured out when I got off and would come in to meet me with my coworker right before I got off work and wait around till my shift ended. He started giving me little gifts, which I always refused. Every time, he would get really offended, so then he would start writing me poetry. Instead of just handing it to me, he would grab and read over my shoulder and point out what every single line meant. I always tried to get other coworkers to help me, but no one saw anything as weird or bad or unsafe, despite the warning bells going off in my head. Then, one day, he cornered me and said he wanted to take me to the train station, because I usually walked. I asked him if he meant he wanted to walk me to the 2 blocks. He shook his head and said, "No, I want to take you in my car, so I can keep a better eye on you." It gave me instant chills. I told him no, but he kept insisting that it would happen before he finally left. I'm a tiny person, so the idea that he was following me long enough to know exactly which train station I went to and the line I got on, there are several different lines going in several different directions, and even the direction I was going really freaked me out. Enough to double up on the defensive measures I normally keep on me, including pepper spray and a taser. I told everyone. I told supervisors, HR, the associate director, everyone I could think of. I had meetings with my direct supervisors where I explained everything that happened and why he was giving me the creeps. But they all just brushed me off, and one manager in particular said I was being too dramatic and he was just a sweet older man doing nothing to harm anyone, until the next time he came around. I told a couple of my coworkers, J and P, 28-year-old male and 26-year-old male, and they both agreed that one of them would always walk me out from now on. On cue, Leonard waited around until after I got off, but J and P, who said they'd look out for me, were both super busy, so the associate director said he would walk me out, still not believing it was a big deal. We started walking and chatting like old friends, and the whole time Leonard followed us. The associate director had to literally yell at him to finally get Leonard to leave. Right then, he finally realized how serious the situation was getting. The next day, one of the managers, who was super rude and dismissive about the whole situation, had pulled me into her office and profusely apologized. After Leonard was yelled at and went back to the office, the manager had a conversation with him that really creeped her out on my behalf. Apparently, he was saying things like, "My relationship with her is ours and has nothing to do with the organization. You have no right to tell me how to behave around her. She likes me and likes what I'm doing. I'm not making her uncomfortable. She needs me to watch out for her." That same day, the entire management team apologized for not taking immediate action, especially since this is not the first time stuff like this has happened to me. I just asked that from now on I have absolutely no contact with him. I reiterated several times that I absolutely do not want an apology. I want nothing. Since then, I've learned that Leonard has harassed an old coworker who had to file a restraining order against him. This was told to me by the manager who originally dismissed my claims. She had dealt with the other situation, yet nothing was told to any of the other staff members about this behavior. Not only that, she berated me in front of other staff for speaking about my experience, saying that it wasn't big of a deal even though she knew he'd done it before. If I never had to see that guy again, I will be eternally grateful. The situation was never fully resolved before lockdown. I'm very thankful I have been able to work from home, but I'm not sure how to proceed after restrictions are lifted and I have to start going back to work again. I'm thinking about filing a restraining order. My husband and family really want me to, so I will probably do that. I just hope that I don't have to deal with Leonard again like this. This literally just happened, so I'll try to keep this as short and organized as possible. I'm a 29-year-old female and my partner is a 23-year-old female. We are back in her hometown visiting her family for about a week. It is a very small, isolated town in the middle of nowhere and basically in the middle of the woods. While we were here, she wanted to meet up with an old high school friend who still lives in the area. We'll call him Kyle. So we meet Kyle at the beach, and right away he's acting super weird, making jokes about having a three-way with us, and just making a bunch of unwelcome, overly gross comments about us. We're unfortunately used to this stuff to a certain extent, but coming from someone who was supposed to be her good friend, it was extra annoying. So, me and my girlfriend are shooting each other panicked looks the whole time. Once he's out of earshot for a second, she says that she's sorry, that he's never been like this before, and we can make an excuse to leave. When he comes back, we tell him we want to get dinner at a local bar, but he just asked to join us. We felt awkward, so we end up saying yes. He says he doesn't know quite how to get there, so he follows us. We get there, order drinks and food, and then head out to the patio with the drinks. He makes a few more gross comments, but is generally being way more cool and normal than he was at the beach. We're smoking weed on the patio and chilling. The food comes quick, and we finish it quicker. Now here's where it gets really messed up. So halfway through my first drink, I'm feeling really tired, which makes sense as we've had a long day. I give my girlfriend the signal that I want to go. She makes an excuse that we need to go. He keeps trying to get us to come to his house. I've got good weed and dabs there and you can meet my cats, blah blah blah. He's being really pushy. We keep saying no and making excuses. We need to check on our grandpa, etc. So finally we get in the car and say goodnight. We've parked next to each other and walk up into the cars together while saying our goodbyes. When we get in the car, my girlfriend informs me that she wants to stay at the bar, but fake it like we're leaving because she doesn't want to chill with him anymore, understandably. So we're sitting in the car waiting for him to leave first. When he signals us for us to roll down the window, we do. He says his GPS is being funny, and we can lead him to the next road. To be fair, we are in the middle of nowhere, so this didn't seem too outlandish. So in the car we were talking about how pushy he was being, and she admitted she feels weird driving right back to her grandpa's house. So we should drive into town until we lose him. He's behind us for a long time, even way after she should have gotten off his exit. We think it's weird, but we weren't sure what to do. So finally, we get on a 2-lane road and he pulls up next to us, and he's waving a phone, which is clearly my girlfriend's phone, in the window. We pull over. He gives her the phone back, chats for just a few seconds, and then leaves in a hurry. Here's the part that makes my skin crawl. We know she had our phone. I saw her put it in her fanny pack, which was on the table along with my phone and her weed. A few minutes before we left the bar, as we were preparing to leave, she didn't take it back out. There is literally no way she could have left it at the bar. More importantly, he got in his car and left the bar at the same time as us, meaning he had to have already had the phone when we were leaving. It's not like we left the bar first and he saw it left on the table or something. He literally had to have been walking to the cars with us and calmly saying goodnight with the phone already in his possession. Now the kicker, apparently, unbeknownst to me, my girlfriend had tasted a very weird bitter taste in her straw at the bar and was already suspicious, especially with how he'd been acting. This is why she wanted to stay back at the bar, to get away from him and stay in public where she felt it was safer. So when he walked up to the car to return her cell phone, she very casually and deliberately flashed the knife that she kept for protection in her jacket. I didn't know at the time that she had done this, so that's why he had left so quickly. Obviously, I was annoyed with her for not telling me her suspicions sooner, but she didn't want me to panic. A few things are clear. 1. He stole my girlfriend's phone, and it seems like he did that so we would be forced to pull over on a dark road in the middle of nowhere. 2. He quickly ended the conversation and left when my girlfriend flashed her knife. They've been good friends for almost 10 years. If he wasn't planning on doing something malicious, I feel he would have acted confused about the knife, but instead he just booked it, which tells me he knew exactly what she was doing, reacting to a threat and preparing to protect herself and me. 3. He probably spiked our drinks. When my girlfriend noticed the weird taste in her straw, she immediately chose not to finish her drink. I finished half my drink and I felt very tired. I'm not sure how he managed to nab the phone without us knowing or noticing. Me and my girlfriend both remember her putting in her fanny pack perfectly, We also have no idea how he could have spiked our drinks unless he was working with the bartender, but we were the ones who suggested that bar. I don't know exactly how he did it, but I think I know why. For that reason, my girlfriend's now ex-friend who made creepy sexual comments, probably tried to drug us, and stole her phone in order to get us alone on a dark road. So this happened about 13 years ago. I was 10 at the time. My brother was 8. We had just moved to a new town that year, and the Walmart here had this sweet arcade up near the tire service desk. So every time my parents would bring us grocery shopping, they'd give us a few extra dollars and let us play in the arcade. The town had an incredibly low crime rate, and the arcade is at the front of the store where dozens of people are checking out, so what could possibly go wrong? My brother is playing the claw machine while I'm standing on the side of the machine, trying to help him angle the claw perfectly above a stuffed animal he's trying to get. Suddenly, this random guy walks up to the claw machine next to us, inserts a quarter and begins moving the claw around, but for most of this time, he's making eye contact with my brother and smiling, not even watching the game. He's not talking to us, just staring and smiling. He has long, thin brown and silver hair, pulled back in a loose ponytail at the base of his skull, a camo trucker hat, and a long scraggly beard. I remember vividly the way he smelled, stale beer, ashtray, and something that smelled like sweet yet sour dirt. He tries making small talk with my brother and I, who were raised to be aware of strangers, but still polite. Eventually, we get bored of the game we're playing and I usher my brother to follow me to a new game, on the opposite side of the arcade. A few seconds later, the man follows us, stationing himself once again at the claw machine next to us. At some point, a lady walks in and says to the weird guy, "What are you doing to these little kids?" and snickers at me. He replies, "I'm trying to win them some stuffed animals." She then begins playing the claw on the other side of us, so that my brother and I are sandwiched between these two strange people. His comment comes across as weird to me, because previously I thought he was maybe trying to win something for his kids, but this entire time, he'd just been following my brother and I from game to game, trying to win us toys. This has been going on for maybe about 20 minutes at this point. They've followed us to several different machines and spent a lot of money. The games were all 25 cents per play. Each time my brother and I switched machines, they'd follow us. The weird guy says to the lady, "I'm out of money, you got any?" She says, "Nah, I'm broke too." My brother says, "I have $1 still." Now this is the part that really scared me. I remember listening to these two talk about some weird things with us, asking if I have a boyfriend, asking where we go to school, where our parents work, asking if we've ever done drugs before, etc. But when my brother said he had $1, she responded with the most terrifying thing I'd heard from them yet. The woman suddenly burst out, "Well, then give it to him, boy." Her face was red. The tone in which she shouted was so ear-piercing and gut-wrenching that I could feel the blood drain from my face. My brother looked like he was about to cry. He hands her the $1 and her face lights up. She laughs it off, almost like she's trying to make it seem like she was just joking around when she screamed at us. My father walks up a couple minutes later. As I turn to tell him that these people have spent close to $15 to win toys for us, they leave hurriedly before he gets a good look at them. My dad is livid. He takes us up to the front desk and tells them what I told him. They make an announcement on the intercom to keep an eye out for these people, and to report to an employee if they see them. Then they call the police. This is what my father tells me after talking to the police. They never did find the couple. The police reviewed security cameras, too blurry to make out any physical details, and told my parents that the couple left the store immediately after my father showed up, without any groceries. So, to the weird couple lurking in Walmart, I hope to never meet you again. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. So this encounter took place approximately 10 years ago when I was 15. I was from a suburban area where my part of town was divided into a grid, approximately 8 blocks long and 8 blocks wide. Me and my friend Jesse were walking home from another friend's house who lives on almost the exact opposite of corner of the development from me. We were on the way home, and as usual I walked him to his house and then walked to mine. We noticed a blue Ford Bronco was circling the blocks throughout our walk, but didn't really think anything of it. We got to his house and we hadn't seen the truck for a few blocks. I assumed I had nothing to worry about. I get another 2 blocks or so and I see the truck again. He was parked on the side of the road, but you could hear that his truck was still running. He followed me all the way home, but was sure to not take the exact same route. I got to my front porch and could see he's parked just a few houses down on the same side of the street. I mentioned it to my dad, an absolute mammoth of a man, and he went out to see the truck. He saw it and started walking down to it when it took off. 2 weeks go by and I haven't seen the Bronco since. This walk home was almost a daily routine at this point. We had a snow day from school and just me and my sister were home. I'm playing on the computer when something catches my eye. Directly to my right is a window, and there's a man standing in it. Now this window's on the first floor, but still approximately 5.5 feet off the ground, bi-level house. This man's entire head and body still fit the window. He's got curly hair, a full beard, and looks to be pretty big as he fills almost the whole window. We locked eyes and I ran out to confront him. I know, stupid. He ran off down the street to the same blue Bronco parked in almost the same spot as last time. He pulled off faster than I could catch him. This time I called the cops. I gave them as much information as I could, and basically all they said was they'd keep an eye out for him. I showed them where he was, and they were able to confirm it by the footprints in the snow leading to and away from the window. Now what had me a bit concerned was I wore a size 12 shoe. My dad, who was still significantly larger than me at this point, wore a 14, and his shoes were still a bit smaller than the imprints in the snow. Well then, we're screwing with Bigfoot now. A few weeks go by and there hasn't been any more weird encounters. My head's been on a swivel every time I'm out of the house. I don't want to say that I was looking for a problem at this point, but I was. I was kinda hoping that this dude would show up and try something. I was ready for it. I wasn't ready. Me and Jesse were walking home from the same friend's house one night and we saw this Bronco again. Screw it. We're young and stupid dudes, so we figure we're gonna trap him. We went completely out of our way to go to the only dead end in the development to try to get to him once we confirmed he was following us. You never know it was a dead end unless you knew the area because there were never and still aren't any dead end or no outlet signs. I guess he had an idea to what we were doing because he knew where we both lived. He didn't follow us down. We thought it was the perfect plan because of how many moves he'd have to make to turn around. Several cars parked on the street, and it's not a cul-de-sac, just a road with no outlet, and thought we could run up on him when he tried to back out. He outsmarted us that day. The next day on the same trip, from the same friend's house, on the same road we see him again. I walk my friend home and figure screw it, I'm fine. I dare this dude to come out at me, and he didn't. This happened several more times over the next week or two, until the guy decided to make his move. I was on my way home after just leaving Jesse at his house. I got another block before I saw the truck. I'm walking perpendicular to his truck when as soon as I'm in his path, he turns on his lights. I ran up the few blocks to my house and waited on the porch to see where he was and what he was doing. This time he stayed put just a few houses down. I told my dad again and he went out to see. Truck's still there. Me and my dad start walking down to the truck and it's still not moving. This ballsy dude had the audacity to get out of his truck to confront us. Terrible idea. He gets out when my dad is still 25 feet from the truck. I guess my dad is about 6'4" and under 300 pounds with a body built by Bud Light and manual labor. This guy though had some size on him. What I saw next was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in my life. So my dad's not much of a talker, and at this point he's already got a problem with this guy. The guy gets out of his truck with the most sadistic smile on his face. My first thought is the guy has a gun. I yelled to my dad that he might have a gun, and all he yelled back was, "I got it." Well, he definitely had it. They walked up to each other, and before a word was even said, my dad swung. The dude was done in. Before he even started to crumple, my dad hit him again. He hit his truck and hit the ground. I never saw the guy again, and after just moving back into my parents' old house with my young son, I hope I never do. So big dude with the blue Ford Bronco, I hope you never come back to my window. So this happened about 14 years ago. I was 21, and it was the days of MySpace. I never used my real name online. It was in the mode of constantly posting pictures of me smoking, etc. So yeah, I happened to work at a local sandwich shop, and upon taking an order from a customer, I hear, "Hey, aren't you?" enter my MySpace name. To which I asked why, of course, and he proceeded to tell me his MySpace name, and I realized we have randomly commented on mutual friends' pages. Okay, whatever. He and his friends sit in the dining area and eat their lunch, but before leaving he came back to the counter. I thought he wanted a refill on his drink, so I went to the counter to ask him what he would like. "Would you like to get drinks with me sometime?" I was a little surprised, but fresh out of a bad breakup and was ready to date, so I said sure, why not? I told him to message me online later and we could work it out. Cut to 2 days later, it's Friday, and he picks me up and we head to a bar across town. I had known this bar was there forever as I grew up there, but had never been inside. We were the youngest ones there by about 30 years, and there was literally only 10 people total inside, including us and the bartender. Weird, whatever. We have a few drinks, play some pool, and it's time to leave. I kept my pace and only had 2 cocktails because I didn't want to get drunk with someone I didn't know. He, unbeknownst to me, was about to be pretty tossed, so we leave. Not wanting to go home, I agreed to go to his house and hang out some more. He lived with his grandmother at the time and had a pool table. We wandered the house for a bit, him showing me random pictures of him growing up, awards won, etc. We play a game and I let him know I need to be getting home. I lived about 20 minutes away by car. He says he's too drunk to drive and that I should stay. Now, I lived with my mom and we didn't always see eye to eye, so calling her 2 to 3 a.m. and waking her up to ask for a ride was not in my list of plans. I told him fine, I would walk. It would have taken me over an hour to walk home, but I was not about to sleep at this guy's house and would have rather taken my chances. The route home didn't go through any bad areas, and I had been a pedestrian for years at that point, so I was used to walking everywhere and was fine with it. All of a sudden, he can drive and doesn't want me walking home alone. Again, whatever. We get to my house and I thank him for the ride, and now he tells me he is too drunk to drive and can't drive home. The place my mom and I lived in was 3 stories, and I had the whole bottom floor to myself and a makeshift living room with couches, so I figured screw it. Sleep it off on the couch and go home in the morning. By now, I had already decided this was going to be the only date we ever went on. Not because of the whole driving situation, but I just wasn't into him. He proceeds to lay on my bed the minute I let him inside like some stray dog or something. So being tired and annoyed and just basically over it, I said fine, I'll sleep on the couch. Well, I don't know how long I was asleep or how he even stayed awake, because it took me forever to fall asleep knowing he was there, and this was all just too weird. I wake up to this guy's hands around my throat. Well, kinda woke up. I remember laying there with my eyes closed and my mind thinking, what's going on? So I pretended to roll over to basically let him know I wasn't unconscious, and he stopped. 20 minutes later, same thing. This time I sat up, pushed him away, and started yelling at him. What are you doing? Get out, now. And the strangest thing was, it was like he wasn't even fully there. His eyes were open, but it's like he was in a trance and wasn't even fully aware of what was happening. I grabbed his keys and wallet off the table, opened the door, shoved him outside, threw his keys and wallet at him, and slammed the door. He never knocked or anything, and I kept the lights off so he couldn't see me watching him through the window, phone in hand ready to call 911. My mom was 2 floors above asleep. He kind of staggered off where I couldn't see him, so I just sat on my bed listening. 30 minutes later, I heard his car start and drive off. I logged onto MySpace right away, blocked him, and blocked his number in my phone. I showed my boss his picture the next day, explained the situation, and just let him know that if I ever saw him walking again, that I was walking to the back until he left, and to just tell him I quit. Never heard from him again. I, a 23-year-old female, grew up in a rural area in Ontario. It was the kind of place where you never lock the doors because you know everyone in town. The all too trusting small town mentality stayed with me once I moved to a big city for university. I got an apartment in a student area with a college nearby and plenty of bars within walking distance. I lived with a guy friend, Roddy, who was a few years older than me from the same small town. I would go to the bars with friends on the weekends and stumble home by myself around 2 a.m. One night on my way home, my neighbor, Kyle, and I met in the hallway, both headed to our own places. He was also drunk and good looking. He said hello and invited me inside. I ended up staying the night with him. He was nice, and it was a fun night, if not a little awkward. We didn't exchange numbers, and it didn't seem like we cared for anything to come out of it, so I went home in the morning and that was that. Fast forward to 2 days later. I was asleep in my bed, and my roommate was half asleep on the couch with the TV on. He heard a sound that might have been the door creaking open, but he ignored it in his tired state. A few minutes later, he opened his eyes to see a naked man standing in front of him, lifeless and staring into his eyes. It was Kyle. Roddy tried to talk to him and ask him what he was doing here, but he didn't respond. Roddy ran to my room and said, I think Kyle's here to see you. So I followed him out into the living room and saw completely naked Kyle, staring at us with the most serious and concentrated eyes I had ever seen. Roddy tried to talk to him and asked him to leave, but once again he didn't respond. Instead, he went into our kitchen and opened the fridge. He proceeded to take our butter out and start smearing it all over his face and chest, saying nothing, and still with a completely serious look on his face. Roddy and I ran to my bedroom to talk about what to do. While we were in my room, Kyle walked down the dark hallway that led to us and stood in the dark right before the light of my room could reach him. All you could see was his silhouette, and he started whispering, "Hi, hi," repeatedly. Roddy and I ended up calling the police and staying in my room until they came and took him back to his house. They said he must have been on drugs, but probably wasn't a threat. I agreed I didn't think he was a threat, but I didn't sleep well that night knowing he was a thin wall away from us in that apartment. My family decided to fly across the country to visit me in LA, where I live. We thought it would be nice to visit Catalina Island. When we arrived, it became apparent to us that it was off-season. It was late November, the weather was cold, and as a result, the island was nearly empty besides locals and a few straggling tourists such as ourselves. Our first priority was to ditch our luggage so we could explore the island, so we immediately checked into our motel, though that word hardly does the place justice. I called a motel because all the doors to the rooms exited to the outside, but in actuality our room was one of the 20 to 30 quaint guest house looking buildings arranged in sort of a horseshoe shape around a walkway, with rooms on either side of the path. The entrance to the motel was essentially one of the points of the horseshoe, and if you walked dead straight, you'd reach the room we were given, essentially on the corner before you have to go right to go further into the horseshoe. So from our room, one path led back to the street, the other further into the secluded maze of rooms. After a day of exploring and having just finished dinner, it was time for the cold, dark walk back to the room. Catalina Island is a decent distance from the mainland, and it gets dark. I pulled my black hoodie tighter over my freezing ears and walked ahead of my parents to the hotel room, telling them I just wanted to go to sleep. And I did immediately. I was already losing consciousness as they entered after me, drifting off without so much as a good night. I then woke up to my mom saying my name, a harsh whisper. The room had 2 beds, my parents' bed closer to the door and mine further in the room. My mom's voice cut through the silence again. She sounded concerned for me. I didn't blame her, considering my mental state at the time. Groggy, I rolled over. "What?" I asked. As my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight coming in through the curtains, I saw her turn to face me. She was surprised to see me in my bed. Her eyes got wide. If I'm in my bed, who was she talking to? We both looked back to where she was previously looking to see a hooded figure in all black standing over their bed. This was horrifically startling as it was on an island in the middle of the ocean and wake up to see a hooded stranger looming over you. This moment seemed to last forever. My mom's words became low and severe as she said my dad's name in a dire voice I've never heard her use before. Then the hooded figure did something so bizarre and unsettling. It didn't advance towards us, but instead crouched in the corner near where it stood. The way it crouched was so absolutely unexpected, even in regards to this already unexpected situation, that it terrified me. It seemed animalistic. I knew 2 things. The hooded figure had been standing over us sleeping, and it's not acting in any sort of way that I could understand. As opposed to the infinite moment of this figure standing over us mere seconds ago, the series of events that unfolded when my hulking ex-military dad woke up happened in an instant. Suddenly, we were out the door, not knowing which way the intruder went. My mom was screaming, "Get him, get him." My dad was running down one path of the horseshoe, further into the hotel, shouting through sheer adrenaline. I ran down the other path, towards the street. When I got there, not a sign of the intruder, but it became suspiciously quiet behind me. I ran back to the room to find my dad quietly walking back, his head low. He gets really close to me and I hear him say, "It's a kid." The explanation: some young teen, tall and lanky as I am in my 20s, wearing all black including a black hoodie, went into the wrong room, our room. The one time my parents just so happened to forget to lock the door. My mom woke up when he entered and seeing a tall person in a black hoodie, thought he was me, assumingly leaving the room. And when the hooded figure crouched, that was him when he realized his mistake and panicked. He was scared of us. As I got back to the room, my mom walked out and hugs this kid, who was now crying his eyes out. I would be too if a massive ex-soldier was sprinting after me with murder in his eyes. So, to the now traumatized kid from Catalina Island, sorry for the misunderstanding. For a bit of backstory, I live in a big city which is mostly a friendly place, but like all cities, it has its rough areas. There are 2 main spots that are known to be particularly rough, and for the first 14 years of my life, I lived in one of those areas. So though it can naturally be a bit uncomfortable, I tend to be pretty unbothered by odd people talking to me in the street. Anyway, I moved from one rough area and moved to a safer one, but it's very close to where I originally lived. I know both of these areas pretty well too, which helped me with what happened 5 months ago. I had some stuff going on in my personal life and going through phases of bad anxiety as it is. I had to make the decision to take some time off of work, but wanted to try and stay in a routine and be productive. I went to the dentist way past when I should have, so I made an appointment and when it rolled around, I walked there. My dentist is in the rough area that I now live close to. On my route home, I have to walk past a pub on a main road which has a super bad reputation. Anything you can think of, it's happened inside or just outside of this pub. Anyway, I noticed someone sat on the bench outside the pub. I have my headphones in but see him saying something, so I assume he's asking me for something and take an earplug out. He asked me if I want to join him for a drink. This was around 11:30 a.m. by the way. I just said no thanks. Now as soon as I got a few steps away, I had this bad feeling like something was just not right. As I mentioned though, I was going through a phase of bad anxiety, so I chalked it up to just being that. After about 2 minutes, I go to turn left and see the man walking in my direction in the corner of my eye. I told myself it was nothing, but took my headphones out anyway just in case, as I was about to walk through a narrow road that leads to a car park and is always very empty. All of a sudden I hear him shouting at me, "Hey miss, I'm talking to you, wait." He catches up to me and tells me, "I'm not a creep, but you're too beautiful to let go." I try and stay polite but also make it clear I'm not interested. He asked if I was single. I said yes. When he asked what I was doing that night, I said I had no plans. I 100% know I should have lied, and as the truth came out I was really annoyed with myself, but whatever. He seems to get the message and I say I really have to go, so I carry on walking thinking that it's the end of it. So I make my way across this big car park. At the end of the car park is a cycle/pedestrian lane that has a massive wall on one side with 2 lots of steps that lead to a car park to a retail park, and bushes on the other end, and it's super narrow. I get into the lane and hear footsteps like someone is running, probably a jogger. I I'm getting paranoid until right behind me I hear, "At least give me your number." I finally start to panic and realize actually it's not my anxiety and this is super shady. I give him my number but change the last digit and this guy proceeds to attempt to drop call me. Clearly my phone doesn't ring and then he starts getting annoyed saying I need to give him the right number. He then has his hand basically on my phone, standing way too close to me and orders me to type his number in and drop call him. Creep now has my number. Still not enough for him, I reiterate that I'm on my way somewhere and seriously need to get going. He then grabbed me by my elbow and I had a massive adrenaline rush. Next thing I knew I was at the top of one of those sets of steps that lead to a much busier and open space. I ran as fast as I could. Luckily one of my friends works in one of the stores in the retail park, so I ran over to it practically looking over my shoulder the whole time. I find my friend, visibly shaking, can barely speak. She asks if I'm okay and I just burst into tears. I gather my thoughts and tell my friend what just happened. He's been calling my phone this whole time. She takes my phone and notes his number and then blocks him. She takes me to the staff room and convinces me to file a police report, which I do. Unfortunately though, I found out street harassment is not actually illegal where I live, but because he made physical contact, it might not be a complete lost cause. The police tell me they will be in touch. Now fast forward until around 2 weeks later. A mom's friend who knew about what happened sent her an article and asked her to show me. I genuinely couldn't believe my eyes. It was about a man who had followed a girl and then assaulted her in the same rough area. At the end of the article is a picture. It's him. I haven't heard anything from the police, and since he had already been charged, I figured there wasn't any need for me to contact them again. My heart goes out to the girl, and although currently in jail, I really hope neither of us ever have to face him again. His charge was pretty serious, so he will be there for a long time, thankfully. The following experience happened to me a few years ago when I was on the train home from school. It was around 10 p.m. at night as I had stayed back in a public library to study. One thing you should know is that my train line is particularly dodgy, and you can meet some truly weird people on the train when it's late. When I got into my carriage that night, it was particularly empty, apart from 3 women sitting on the opposite end of the carriage. I sat down and plugged my earphones in to watch YouTube. My train ride usually takes around 45 minutes. About 3 stops into the train ride, and the only other person who had gotten onto my carriage at the time was a man who was wearing construction clothes. He sat near the 3 women, so I assumed he knew them. I turned my attention back to my video. A few minutes later, I noticed that the 3 women who were sitting on the opposite side of my carriage had moved to my side. I didn't really think much of it as I was engrossed in the video I was watching. That's when I noticed someone take a seat opposite of me. It was the man who had gotten on earlier. He asked me my name, but he was giving me a weird vibe, so I pretended like I couldn't hear him. I had my earphones in after all. He then proceeded to tap my knee to gain my attention. There was no use ignoring him, so I removed my earphones and looked at him. He was a big guy, probably around early 40s, and he was clean shaven. He asked me my name, to which I gave him a fake name. He then asked me how old I was. I was in my school uniform at the time, so I told him. He reached out his hand and introduced himself. Not wanting to be rude, I extended my own hand to shake his hand. This is when things started to get weird. His handshake was super weird. His grip was abnormally tight and he seems to pull my hand towards him as he shook it. I quickly withdrew my hand. He then asked me if I had a girlfriend, as he thought I was quite attractive. Alarm bells began to ring in my head and glanced over at the 3 women who refused to even look over my direction. Seeing as they would be no help, I would just have to look out for myself. He then took out his phone and started showing me a picture of a girl who seemed to look around my age. He then asked me if I thought she was beautiful. Again, not wanting to be rude, I simply nodded and said she was. He then asked me if I would be interested in marrying her. I just started laughing as I thought he was just joking around, but his eyes were dead serious, and he just glared at me. He repeated his question, to which I responded that I did not know her and that it was inappropriate. He suggested that I give him my number so that he could arrange for us to meet. This seriously creeped me out and I politely declined, stating that I was busy with school and that I was not looking to get into a relationship. As I said this, the train was coming to a halt at a station. I was still 3 stops away from mine, but I decided that it was time for me to get out of the situation. I apologized that this was my stop and that it was nice to meet him. As I got up to leave, he extended his hand for a handshake and thanked me for talking to him. I didn't want to shake his hand, but I did not want to trigger him, so I reached out my hand. Suddenly, he grabbed my hand and pulled it towards him. His eyes were full of anger. He then asked, "What, you don't want to marry my daughter? I will break you." I quickly broke the grip and left the carriage. As it was nighttime, there were always police officers patrolling the platforms. I rushed towards one of the officers and told him everything that happened. I then described his clothing and which carriage he was sitting on. While waiting for the next train, the same officer came up to me and told me that officers had picked him up 2 stations down and thanked me for letting him know. Although the officer asked for my details, I was never notified as to what happened to him. I just hope that I never have to experience a man on a train like that in the future. Back in my high school years, I'd often meet with a few friends at a local Dunkin' Donuts, which was conveniently near a railway we'd all take to our weed guy's house. My closest friend at the time, Katie, and I usually met up earlier than everyone else just to hang out, order our extra large drinks and hash browns, and attempt at some "hey mister" shenanigans to score some boys from anyone willing to buy us beer. I'd consider us to be pretty naive and overly nice girls, which never proved to be an issue to either of us until we were nice to the wrong person. Now for a little background on my hometown, I grew up in the forgotten borough of New York City, Staten Island. For those who are unaware, there was, and kind of still is, a pretty bad drug problem, so seeing zombie-like civilians strolling the streets is very common. Because of this, I became pretty good at spotting out someone struggling with drugs and things of that sort. Anyways, on this one day, Katie and I met up at Dunkin' and sat at our usual booth. We were in the midst of messing around with our phones and being overly giggly selves when I noticed out of the corner of my eye, someone suddenly stopped outside of the glass door. Still smiling, I glanced over to see if it was maybe one of our friends. I ended up making direct eye contact with the guy. I looked away unbothered and carried on, just another customer anyways. After the guy got his coffee, he sat directly at the table across from our booth. I chose to ignore the fact he sat weirdly close and resisted eye contact since that already awkwardly happened, but I guess the motion caught Katie's attention as she looked over her shoulder at the man settling in. She looked back at me, made a face that said, okay, and we just giggled and tried to move on. Every now and then I glanced in his direction, mainly just because I like to be observant of my surroundings, but also because I kept seeing him scratch at his nose, neck, and face in my peripheral vision, and noticed he was bleeding from various little cuts on his body. This was a dead giveaway he was doing some form of drug, as they tend to get very itchy and scratch until they break skin. A few minutes later, the man asked if one of us had a charger he could borrow. I kindly denied, and Katie only had an iPhone charger while the man clearly had an Android phone. This slight exchange was enough for the man to feel invited, and he continued to make comments for quite some time. Being that this was about 4 years ago, I don't remember this entire conversation, but I do remember him often asking general questions like if we live around here, what do we do in our free time, and creepy things of that sort. I was pretty vague yet polite in my responses, but Katie was always a bit more enthusiastic in her words, making it pretty easy for this guy to reciprocate and basically join our conversation altogether. In Katie's innocent stupidity, the guy basically found out some of the main train stops we get off at to hang in those areas. He also found out we would smoke weed, which also made this guy feel even more inclined. At some point, he mentioned how his ex-girlfriend got into some trouble, got him into heroin, which he used to sell, served jail time for, and pretty recently got out. He also mentioned how he's been an ice cream truck driver ever since his release, and told us that he's always driving around the train stops Katie mentioned earlier. He also repeatedly offered to give us rides around in his truck someday, with free ice cream as the bribe. Again, we were pretty naive and overly nice girls, Katie more so than I, and so one thing led to another, and eventually this guy was asking for Katie's social media, which she happily obliged to. She's always been really dedicated to expanding her follower count. Throughout this entire exchange, I was mostly just nodding, smiling, laughing here and there, so my remaining silence during the social media exchange went unnoticed. However, once the guy started following Katie on Instagram, he quickly found mine through a tagged picture on her page. I wasn't private at the time, so he immediately started liking and commenting on nearly every one of my pictures. The comments were extremely cringy, consisting of heart and kiss emojis. Finally, after the longest half hour ever, I urged we should really be catching our train. Fortunately, the man wasn't persistent after that and we were on our way with no problem. After some verbal recap of what just happened, I convinced Katie to block him and I did the same. We brushed it off after that. I honestly forgot about this strange interaction until about a week later. I was hanging out with some friends at a park near my high school when munchies made me crave Ralph's Ice, which was just up the block. I ventured off with one other friend and almost made it to the store before the sound of an ice cream truck approached from behind us. Completely lost in conversation, my attention was only caught by the high-pitched screeching of the truck's brakes and a somewhat familiar voice. Of course it was him. He shouted out to me, but with Ralph's only a couple feet in front of us, I ignored him and rushed in with my friend. The guy didn't stick around, being that he was blocking the whole lane on a narrow two-way road, but we still called our friend at the park to pick us up in his car. For the next 2 weeks, there were about 4 times this man tried to pick me up in his truck, at this point making me pretty paranoid I was potentially being stalked. The last time it happened, he was parked directly outside of one of the main train stops, almost if he was waiting for me. He again called out to me asking why I blocked him and saying he just wants to be friends. At this point I had enough and told him to just leave me alone. My dad's a lieutenant, which was a lie but slipped out in my defense. I walked away before he could respond and into the diner I was meeting with my friends at that night. I saw his truck drive away in the window and never had an interaction with the ice cream man again. So I'm a fairly small human with a very large dog. I'm about a 5'1" female, my dog is a Nikita who is around 100 pounds, and probably stronger than me if she ever actually tried. We go for walks twice a day every day for about 3 miles each, and one of these is at night. We live in the middle of a metropolitan area, so there's lots of hotels, stores, and restaurants all over the place, and there's always people out and about. I never felt unsafe walking around our area with my large dog, especially since with all these businesses comes regularly patrolling police cars and several private security agencies all around. We've lived here for nearly 3 years and walking every day and night without a single problem. On to tonight. We left for our normal walk, and while the streets are far less crowded, there are still some people out. We were about a mile from our apartment building when I walked past a man standing next to a convenience store in a dark gray hoodie. A lot of the homeless population around here sit outside of the convenience stores regularly, so I didn't initially think anything of it. We stepped to the edge of the sidewalk so that we would be about 6 feet away and intended to just walk past, but the man started to follow us and talk to me. He asked me about my dog at first. This is very common for us because she's not a very well known breed and she's beautiful, if somewhat intimidating animal. Unfortunately in this case, intimidating doesn't translate to aggressive. I answered that she's a Nikita and continued to walk, keeping a good amount of distance between myself and the man, whom I will now call CJ. CJ starts asking why I'm walking away from him and specifically says that he's rude because we're old friends. I looked at him to make sure I wasn't wrong and said loudly, "No, I don't know you." I start walking faster and cross the street because I could see police lights flashing not far up the street. Sometimes, the patrol cars will leave their lights on when there is no one in them. I'm not sure why, but that was the case here. I walked much more quickly towards the lights with CJ following me, telling me I'm being mean and calling me Ashley over and over. To be clear, my name is not Ashley. While there was no security guard in the car, there were a few other people around. So I turned around and yelled again, "I don't know you, leave me alone." CJ stopped walking towards me, but I heard him mumble something else about whoever Ashley is. At this point, I just really wanted to get home as quickly as possible because I was a little bit panicked. This man was much taller than me and looked fairly large, at least compared to me, so it made me very nervous that he had been following me. I decided to take an indirect route home that would take me away from the street I was currently on that CJ had been sitting on originally. I was a few more blocks away down a different street when I saw him again. I had been keeping an eye out behind me to see if he followed, but no, he had crossed the street and was in front of me. I don't know if he had been hoping I wouldn't notice and walk up to him or what. I think that must be it because CJ had put a bandana over his face and had pulled up the hood, but I recognized the jacket and the frame and was sure it was the same guy. To get home, I would have to cross the street and walk right towards him. Instead, I crossed the street parallel to where he was, and he did as well. They continued to walk toward me and start shouting, calling me Ashley again. I didn't hear a lot of what he said, but I turned and ran with my dog in the other direction. About a block away was a hotel, so I walked into the lobby and right into the front desk. The front desk worker could tell something was wrong because I was clearly just trying not to cry. I apologized for bringing my dog in, but said that someone had been following me and I wanted to know if I could wait here and call the police. The worker was very kind and walked to the glass door and asked which man it was. I couldn't see him anymore in the direction from which I had come, so for a moment I thought CJ had left, but no. He was at the other end of the parking entrance, hood down now, but standing against the wall as if he was ready to just wait. The worker said I could wait as long as I needed and he called the police from the hotel phone. I think they had the non-emergency line written down, and since he hadn't technically done anything yet, but yell and follow me around for a while, I agreed that the non-emergency line was probably the right choice. A cruiser showed up fairly soon though, and I pointed out CJ to the cops, who was still just waiting there against the wall. Technically, I couldn't prove he'd done anything illegal, but the cops went and told him that he needed to leave the property as he was trespassing. They waited for him to leave, and they gave me and my dog a ride back to my apartment building to make sure he didn't continue to follow us and find out where we live. I don't know who CJ was or who Ashley is, but let's not meet, and I hope Ashley doesn't meet him either. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This happened last night and the night before. A little backstory first. I live in a not so safe area. If you walk down my block, there is a lot of crime. When we leave our house, we hit up a side street that gets us away from trouble. Like I said, my block isn't bad. We all get along here. Most people in this block are related to each other. All but for my household, but even though we are strangers to the neighbors, they are nice to us. The people right next door have dogs as well as a few other households. Again, we are the odd ones out in the department as well. The dogs only bark when someone is out on our block that doesn't live here. I have always felt safer because of the dogs. I live in a home converted into a duplex. When you walk in the front door, you're in the entryway, and then across the entryway you see my apartment door. Then if you go up the stairs beside my door, you will find the door to the second apartment. The front door to the house has no lock mechanism at all. It's so tenants cannot lock each other out of the house. We can only lock the doors to our apartments. When you come into the entryway, a motion sensing light comes on. No one is currently living in the upstairs apartment right now, so at this time it's just me and my husband living in the place. 2 nights ago my husband was in bed and I was up watching TV. I was all relaxed and thinking about going to bed soon. It was nearly 1 AM. Suddenly, I got this overwhelming uncomfortable feeling. I felt hot and sick in my stomach, and I had the intrusive thought that I needed to check the apartment door to make sure it was locked. I tried to brush it off but I couldn't, so I got up to look. Just as I got there, I heard someone open the screen door on the outer house door. I looked and the door was locked. Then I heard the actual door of the house open and someone stepping into the entryway. I was terrified. I know no one lives upstairs, so my landlord said he would let me know if someone was moving in. We don't get visitors this late or without a phone call first. Then I heard a click. I recognized the click as the sound of the motion light makes when it turns on. Then I hear a male voice say, "Oh crap," and the sound of someone running out of the house. I stood there trying to process what just happened. From the time I heard the screen door open until a solid minute after the person ran out, I stood there frozen. The neighborhood dogs were barking their heads off all that night, and they only do that if someone is around that they don't know. I think that someone who doesn't know that the house is a duplex attempted to let themselves in. The light, which is way too bright for that tiny entryway, came on and scared the person away. I woke up my husband and we called the police, and they said that since the person was not trying to get into my apartment exactly, they weren't coming out. The best they would do is drive by a few times. Last night I was up late again. The dogs were barking like crazy yet again. At a little after midnight I hear a noise. I mute the TV. I realize someone is pounding, not knocking, but full on pounding on the outer house door. Not my apartment door, thank goodness. I was freaked out. I wanted to go in and wake up my husband, but thought better of it. There is a window beside the outer house door where he was knocking, and that window is our bedroom window. Because my husband was sleeping and the lights were on in the living room, but off in the bedroom, I thought if I opened the door, the person standing on the porch hammering on the door would see the light and then know someone was there. I was afraid to let whoever was out there to know someone was here. I sat there for over 10 minutes of banging. It was not stopping. I thought maybe it was the police because of the call I made the night before, so I called the police and told them what was happening and about what happened the night before and about my call to them the night before. I asked could it be the police at my door. He looked into it and said that as far as he could tell, whoever it was not the police. He also said not to open the door. He said he was sending police out, and if someone was still begging on the door, they would talk to them, and he said he would call when he knew what was going on. The begging stopped after about 5 minutes after hanging up with the police dispatcher, but I never got a phone call, so I don't know if the police ever showed up. Tonight the dogs are barking and have been for the past hour. My husband decided that I am going to bed early and he is staying up. I doubt I will sleep anyways. I made him promise that no matter what he hears, he won't unlock and open our front door. I just hope to never meet this person. My husband stayed up later last night, so when I go to bed alone I put the TV on. It helps me fall asleep, and as I said yesterday, our bedroom window looks out on the porch and is beside the outer door of the house. Well, the neighborhood dogs were barking like mad but nothing happened. I am thinking they realized that someone was home and possibly awake. Normally my husband comes in to check on me, and if I'm asleep, he turns off the TV, but he left it on until really late, so maybe they won't come back, and I hope they never do. So when I was in high school, it was my senior year. I was 5'3". I was at the park down the street from my house waiting for the school bus. Usually my boyfriend who was already graduated would drive me to school, but he was busy. I later found out he was cheating. Well, there were usually a few of us girls there waiting, but this day I was the only one. So I sat at a bench that had one phone in and one out so I could listen to my surroundings. As I waited, a black Honda pulled up and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious that I was watching it because I didn't want to look crazy, but after a few minutes 2 big men got out. I immediately texted my boyfriend that I was at the park and these guys were creeping me out. Of course he didn't text back, so I copy-pasted the same text to my cousin who was home. I lived with my aunt and 2 guy cousins, unwinding down from the night shift. I wanted someone to know the car make and color, plus it was 2 men. I didn't get any responses. When they got out of their car, they started to walk towards me, so I got up from the bench and walked towards the street because the bus was supposed to be there any minute. The driver actually ended up being a little late. As I stood by the street, these men walked up to me and I could feel the bad energy. One guy said hello as the other guy stood there staring me down. I just did a small smile and a nod, then looked away. Then the same guy I'll call number 1 asked how old I was. I didn't respond. I could tell the other guy number 2 was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. The number 1 kept asking me yes or no questions like, do you have a boyfriend? Do you live close? Do you have drugs? We have some, do you want some? I felt a cold rush go over my body and I got the chills. Number 2, who was quiet the whole time, started to tell me they just got back from Russia, but the way he said it was so scary, almost intimidating. I knew they were from somewhere else because they had strong accents, but I couldn't pinpoint the place. They kept telling me to go to their car because they had drugs. I said no thank you. Then number 1 asked me if I have a car. I said no and that my bus is almost here, sorry have to go, and by some sort of miracle the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer as they asked me questions. But before the bus got to me, number 1 handed me a card and said he had a car shop and to call him sometime if I need anything. He even stated he'd give me a free car. The card looked shifty and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew I needed that number on it to report it. So I took off and they walked off super fast. Finally the bus stopped and picked me up. As soon as I got on, I started to cry. I had a complete meltdown. It was like all the adrenaline was keeping my mind and body aware and focused while the men were there, but as soon as I was safe, my body and mind gave out. Thankfully, there weren't many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what happened. When she looked around for the car, they were gone. She said she saw them around me, but I thought I knew them because they were so close to my person. The driver called into her dispatch, saying that there was an incident so that they could notify the school. She continued to pick up all the other students up, but when we got to the school, she walked me to the office. I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out and so did the campus security. They were so sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men and they proceeded to ask me questions about the men, their car, and the questions the creeps had asked me. I cried the whole time. Then I pulled out the card the guy gave me and handed it to the principal. He looked at the security and said he was going to call it and act like my dad, so he did. It was on speaker and number 1 answered. I knew his voice as if it burned into my brain. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack. The principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price and the guy played dumb. The principal said his daughter, me, gave him the card. As soon as he said that, the guy hung up. They tried calling again and the phone was shut off, then eventually disconnected. I could see a shift in the principal and security as soon as the phone clicked. The security got his phone and called the police and had them come to the school. It was as if they finally knew it was real, like my crazy story wasn't made up. The principal excused himself with the security guard and they talked for a minute in the hall. I could hear everything they were saying. She's lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to call our parents to come get her. When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in and asked me for the story again and in front of the principal and security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me it sounded like they were watching us girls at the park because they chose the one day that one of us were alone. He also said the car was being used as bait to get me to go where they wanted. I felt sick. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that picked up first was my boyfriend. One of the officers talked to him as the other finally got a hold of my aunt. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle, aunt, mom, and cousins were all out front. A week later, some girl at another local high school, not far from the park, was saved by other students. She was being dragged into a black Honda by 2 guys. The other kid stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out of the car. The principal called me into his office and that's how I found out. They also had the same officers there and had me choose the 2 guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out fast. They were caught. It was in fact those 2 guys that tried grabbing that girl. A freshman girl. I felt worried for her and sad she went through worse than I did. I couldn't believe they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year. I'm thankful to be alive and well, and I'm even more thankful that the girl was also saved by the courageous kids at her high school. I was about 19 and I transferred to a college very far from home. My parents had raised me pretty dependent, so it didn't upset me. I saw it as a fun challenge. One of the biggest changes to get used to was not having a car. I could have gotten one, I guess, but it would have just been a hassle to find places to keep it when I wasn't at school, etc., so I just opted for the bus instead. I'm not a big fan of person-to-person interactions, so I always made sure to sit up front, hopefully by myself, with my bag in the other seat, and not only headphones in, but a book open as well, all friendly signals to please go away. Thing is, I'm not that great at actually telling people to go away. I had gotten on the bus to head to the mall for a bit, and I realized someone was talking to me. I paused my music and looked up. A homeless man was asking if the seat was taken. There weren't really a lot of people on the bus, but I felt awkward and very rude saying no, like I was judging him. I didn't want to appear unkind, so I moved my bag and then made a big show of putting my music back on and raising my book up to read. I had to keep pausing my music because the man kept talking to me. I kept trying to downplay it to myself that it was just his idea of small talk, even though the questions pointedly fixated on details about me, my age, how pretty I was, if I had a boyfriend. I lied and said yes, of course, and that didn't dissuade interest at all, and so on. It was a very long 20 minutes. He kept getting closer, never overtly touching or filling the space in a way that I could make an obvious complaint about, but by the time we arrived he was practically faced completely toward me. It was definitely blocking me from moving to another seat. Finally my stop came and I jumped up. He was perfectly nice about moving so that I could get by, or so I thought. Turns out he was actually just getting up himself to get out of the same spot, not pausing for a moment and talking to me. Great. It was the middle of the day on a crowded street, so I didn't feel like I was in imminent danger, and therefore felt that anything other than open welcoming would be the height of rudeness for me. I smiled awkwardly and moved on toward the mall, only for him to fall in step with me, continuing to ask for details about myself and my boyfriend. Being naive, I tried to cut him off with, "Oh, I'm headed to the mall," but of course that only gave him the chance to say, "Me too," and well, we headed there together. He started talking to me about how good of friends we were now and how close he felt to me and so on. Honestly, I checked out a good while ago and was trying to find ways to ditch this guy. I ducked into the first store I saw when I got to the mall and he followed me in. I was at this point not even making full sentences, just mumbling things about, "Oh sorry, I need to," and then I tried to lose him down another aisle. It didn't work. I finally made a turn he couldn't follow quick enough and literally hid behind some shelves waiting for him to go by. I dashed out of the store and he saw me and yelled at me to wait and ran after. I ran down the strip and dashed into a random store and went straight to the back to the dressing rooms. I hid in one of them for as long as I felt that I could, and then I peeked out and saw him in the larger mall area, scanning. He finally moved off down the wrong way and I stayed in the store another half an hour, pretending to look at clothes. I don't know what the shop girls must have thought. I was clearly shaken and to the point of tears, but I had called my mother by that point and was keeping her on the phone. When I left, I ran out of the mall and went around to a different bus stop, in case the man would be back at the first one. I was so scared that he would show up again and this time follow me to my apartment. There's a lot I didn't do right in that situation, but I'm just glad I was lucky enough to lose the guy. I can't say what my job was, because what I did was literally the name of the company, but it had something to do with law in a small basement office. This office had 2 main rooms and a bathroom. The boss worked in the room in the back, while the rest of us, 3 in total, worked in the front. This wasn't a place where clients came and met with us. It was just where we got work done on computers and packages sent before leaving. Oftentimes I worked alone the last 3 hours, which in reality was great. I got to listen to whatever music I want, sing and get stuff done on the computer. On occasion my boss would come to pick something up or just get a bit more work done. And on this day he did, but he came in with an older gentleman that I didn't recognize. My boss explained that the man was a customer from one of the companies on the top floor and he left only to realize he really needed to go to the bathroom and asked to use ours. My boss stuck around near my desk until the man left and then got to work. As I continued to work, I began to cough and wheeze a bit. Breathing became painful and, at first, I didn't know why until I gradually got a whiff of smoke, cigarette smoke. None of my coworkers smoked and I don't know if I'm allergic or intolerant to cigarette smoke, but I instantly feel ill whenever I begin breathing it in. I shrugged it off and watched my breathing, being sure nothing bad was happening to me, and not soon after my boss grabbed his coat and began to leave. He said, "Your coworker will be coming in a bit just to pick some stuff up," and as he opened the door, the scent of smoke burst through and on the ground were cigarette butts from what he said. Thus, he continued with, "And let's have you lock the door behind me too." I couldn't agree more. That was creepy. But if it was the man who used our bathroom, it wasn't too strange to assume he'd hunkered at the bottom of the stairs to take in some smoke before leaving. When my boss left, I made extra sure that the door was locked before continuing with my work. Another hour had passed by, about an hour and a half remaining of work when I began to smell smoke again. My heart sank as I turned my eyes to the door and quietly got up from my chair. I usually took off my shoes at work. Like I said, we didn't have clients come there. We were pretty chill when it came to wardrobe, but even with them off, I tiptoed over to the door and pressed my ear against it. I didn't hear anything at first, however, the scent of smoke was prominent there. For one reason or another, I decided just to go back to my desk and wait until my coworker got there. Not 10 minutes more in though, I heard this click, click, click sound. It was subtle and I had to look around to spot where it was coming from. It was the doorknob of our office. From where I sat, I could see it just slightly jerk back and forth. The person was doing it slowly as I was sure they were trying to be quiet. By this point, I called up my coworker to come sooner. In some ways, I felt safe. I was in a locked area after all, but who knows, right? After calling him though, the scent began to diminish and the doorknob stopped moving. I tried to listen for someone going up the stairs. I didn't hear anything for a long while until I heard someone coming down them. It was my coworker. He came in and said, "There are like 10 cigarette butts out here." I explained further what had happened as he came in and locked the door himself. I also explained the man who'd come in to use our bathroom prior. Like I said, I couldn't be sure if they were the same person. There wasn't much to take from the offices. The computers were fairly old, wouldn't at all get a good chunk of money from them, and everything else was paper. We weren't at all at a place that kept money around. So if it was him, I can't fathom what he saw that he'd feel the need to come back in to steal. My coworker somewhat brushed it off. He figured that the person was gone, all was fine, and went to pick up what he needed to. He ended up staying for a while, I'm not sure why, perhaps he felt like he needed to, because as I began finally finishing up my work, the smell of smoke came back. My coworker and I looked at each other, almost as a way to confirm that we both smelled it. The click-clacking of our computer stopped and we just waited and waited and waited. We didn't take our eyes off each other as the click, click, click came back. I just didn't want to deal with this and go home as soon as possible, but I shirked the thought of walking out there. My coworker was far more fed up. He stood, stomped to the door, unlocked it, and opened it. There was a man there. I didn't get a good look at him. I saw him raise his arm, freeze, and then he disappeared and sprinted up the stairs. My coworker walked me to my car soon after, told our boss about it, and we made it a rule that we always lock the door from that point on. Especially me, because after that day, every now and then, I'd smell smoke and hear the doorknob attempt to twist. Whenever I did, I either called up my boss or waited every now and then I heard the steps leave. Frankly, we should have put a camera up or called the police, something at least. When my coworker described him to my boss, it seemed like he was the same man who used our bathroom, but that is just speculation. We have no idea what he wanted or if there was a purpose. Be careful letting people use bathrooms. They could have ulterior motives. When I was about 8 or 9, my family took a trip skiing to a small resort a couple of hours from where we lived in Spain. The resort itself was a sleepy little town of about 400 to 500 people max, with a few small supermarkets and hotels and not much else. Typically, we picked the worst time possible to embark on the trip, which we had been planning for a good few years. The night after we arrived there was a blizzard, and so we spent the first half of the week locked in the hotel. Although we were able to go outside for the remaining few days, we had little to do given that the slopes were shut. The story I want to tell comes from those first few days locked in the hotel. Despite my parents' annoyance at the timing of the trip being a nightmare, myself and my sister, who was 11 months older, were having a fantastic time. Locked up in the mountains with nothing to do, we were able to spend our days running around the hotel, eating sweets and watching the TV in the lobby. I should probably mention at this point that the hotel was somewhat of a maze. The large bar restaurant area where my parents sat each day reading was at the center of the hotel. The myriad of smaller rooms then connected to the bar area at random points, shooting off in different directions. These rooms often had no discernible function. Each one had the same mahogany interior, and they were full of couches, fireplaces, and antiques that allowed for great games of hide and seek. The rooms would often have offshoots themselves, connecting to new rooms which would then connect to yet more useless wooden caves. As such, it was possible to be 4 or 5 rooms away from the main hotel area at any one time, without knowing exactly where you were or how to get back. Anyway, at some point along the weekend, myself and my sister decided to play hide and seek. Bearing in mind the above, it was almost an impossible challenge to find the hider. At one point in the game, I was just about to give up on searching for my sister until I heard her voice from what sounded like a few rooms away. After successfully navigating the web of rooms, I emerged to find her sitting on a couch alongside a German man with gray hair, probably in his 60s if I had to guess. As soon as I emerged into the room, the man turned to me and told me he was taking my sister to the swimming pool and asked if I wanted to come. I remember immediately thinking it was odd that there was a swimming pool that we hadn't heard of. My parents had been complaining that morning about how much TV we were watching, and so I was sure they would have taken us there if they had known about it. And besides, the hotel did not seem of the size to be able to host one. I told the man that I have to ask my parents first, and told my sister to come back with me to find them. He immediately replied that I should go and that he should take my sister on ahead. I told my sister that she absolutely had to come with me, but excited at the thought of the swimming pool, she said she didn't want to. We began to argue, with the man taking my sister's side and encouraging me to go ask my parents' permission whilst he waited with my sister. I dug my foot in, telling my sister that our parents would be very cross if we went somewhere on our own. And after a few minutes bickering, she eventually gave in and came back with me, giving her assurance to the man that we'd come back. Of course, when we told our parents, they were livid. My dad went back to the room to try and find the man, but with all the offshoots and given that all the random rooms looked the same, it was almost impossible to be sure that we were in the right one. In any case, there was no sign of him. I remember my dad screaming at the hotel lobby that he needed a list of all male guests and their room numbers, but of course they wouldn't give it to him. We spent the rest of the trip by our parents' side, terrified at the thought of being locked up in a blizzard with him. Thankfully, we never saw the man again. My mama and I normally shopped at the market just a few minutes away from our house. My mom had been shopping there for 20-some years at this point and was friends with most of the workers, so I was friendly with them too, and was always happy to talk to them. Whenever my mom got distracted talking to someone, I, with the attention span of a 6-year-old, would wander around the aisle. My mother would keep an eye on me to make sure I didn't get too far, but if she was distracted, one of the employees would usually be around and gently guide me back over. One day though, we went to a different market that I couldn't remember having been to before, and we didn't go back to for nearly a decade. We were walking around the aisles when my mom ran into her friend. They started talking, and I, not realizing that I no longer had a store full of adults keeping an eye on me, started wandering around the aisle. My eyes caught some colorful display, I think flowers or balloons or something, and went over to look. Once I was satisfied with my inspection, I turned back to the aisle only to find my mom wasn't there. That had never happened before. I looked around a little, though not moving from my spot near the colorful displays. Since it was right near the registers, there was a decent amount of people nearby, which I'm thankful for now. As I was looking around, an employee came up to me. He was older than my sister, she was 12 or 13 at the time, and younger than my dad, in his mid-40s, which was about the only way I could gauge age. Now, I would say he was probably in his early to mid-20s if I remember right. "Hi there," he said sweetly, in that tone you normally speak to kids in. I cheerfully said hello, actually stepping a little closer. "Are you looking for mommy?" I say yes, happily explaining that I had last seen her talking to her friend and that I could normally find her easily when I wandered away, so I wasn't sure where she could have gone. "Does she leave you alone often?" "Not really. My older sister was normally with me if my mom wasn't. She was 12 or 13 and she was super mature, so if my mom had to leave her for a little bit, she knew I'd be okay. She never left us alone in public, just at home if she needed to run somewhere, never for very long, and my dad was at work a lot and didn't come back until late usually." "Where do you live?" "Well, you wouldn't know it, I just learned my address. We just learned how to mail a letter in school, even took a little class trip to the mailbox in our school corner to send them out. I knew how to write my address now, and I knew how to say it." "Where do you go to school? Who picks you up?" "Well, I go to the local elementary school. I don't know the address though, sorry, but I know which street it's on because I wait on the sidewalk for my mom or daycare sitter, depending on the day, so I see the street sign a lot since I'm usually waiting for a while to be grabbed." It had only been a few minutes since I last saw my mom. Even with how much information I was dumping, I was a very fast talker, but I was starting to get a little antsy. Not because I was uncomfortable talking to a stranger, but because I had skipped lunch that day specifically to calm my mom into letting me get a bagel from the store next door, which is why we were at the market in the first place. My mom was holding onto the bagel to make sure I didn't try to eat it too fast and choke, which I had done several times in the past. I wanted my bagel, and while I liked talking to this grown man who made me feel smart and was oh so interested in my life, I liked bagels more. Plus, if I caught my mom when we were near the bakery section, I might be able to use my charm and get a cookie. So I gotta find my mom now. "Oh well, I'll walk around with you and help you find her. You wouldn't lead me through the market you work at where you can easily bring me to the back room, meat locker, or any number of places?" "Yeah, sounds good." "Ozzy." I look around to see my mom, the relieved look on her face slowly changing into something more anxious. I smile happily and wave her over. She immediately grabs my hand and I could tell she wants to chide me, probably for leaving the aisle, but she seems more occupied on the man in front of me. Before I can even open my mouth to introduce him, or remember that I never got his name, he quickly says that he's glad I found my mom and he needs to get back to work, and practically runs to the back of the store. My mom puts her hands on my shoulders and looks me in the eye, her expression a lot more worried now. "What was he talking to you about?" she asked, her voice more serious than I'd ever heard her. "Can I have my bagel?" My mom opens her mouth, pauses, and goes into her purse to hand me my bagel. Between bites, I happily tell her about the conversation and everything I remembered. My age and grade, pickup schedule, likes and dislikes, my literal address. My mom gradually became paler, then became red with anger. She brought me over to the manager, and I don't remember much about the conversation. The police weren't called. We went home, and my mom told me I wasn't allowed to walk around the store anymore. No more talking to any stranger, even if they worked at the store we were at, unless she was with me. If I ever saw that man ever again, I was to run away, find someone I know, and ask for help. If all else fails, scream at the top of my lungs. If my mom hadn't found me, something bad might have happened. If not in the store, then in front of my school, and if not in front of my school, then my house. A little over a decade later, I've never seen the guy again. Let's keep it that way. I had started hanging out with a very nasty crowd. They loved to party, never had their own cash, destructive, impulsive, you get the drill. An ex-friend of mine, we'll call him Bob, started hanging out with me quite a bit more and more as the weeks passed by. Bob worked as a pizza delivery driver. He never washed his clothes, to which he owned maybe 3 outfits, including his work uniform and only women's clothes. The women's clothes he wore to be punky. I saw no shame in that. Even thought it was kinda cool how he didn't care what others thought about it. But that also means he liked my clothes, so like a little sister might do, he constantly took my clothes. Keep in mind, he also barely showered. Often, He even woke up before 5 p.m. in time for work. He jumped off my couch, took a pack of my cigarettes without asking, and sped off. Within the 4-month period he stayed in my home, I literally saw him go to take a shower about 5 times. Long after the situation was dealt with and he was gone, I left that home with a stench. He paid nothing, not a single bill, never contributed to groceries, cleaning, nothing, nor was he on my lease. Yet, he established residency in my home legally. It didn't bother me so much at the time. I was at my rock bottom and was basically just happy to have someone be there with me. I considered him to be my goofy and annoying best friend, until that wasn't enough for him. He began to become obsessed with me. Very quickly he went from basically having everything he needed in life for free, while he kept any money or tips he made, but decided on his own accord that we were to be together. If I'd return home from work, friend's house, etc., he'd cry and follow me room to room, asking repeatedly why we can't just be together, that we were best friends already, we should date. I was not attracted to him. Going through a divorce at the time, I did not want to ruin our friendship. It got to the point where I avoided going home. I'd stay with my mother or friends because he'd cry and follow me, desperately trying to convince me to be with him. I'd almost often find him in my bed at this point, and he quit his job to have a better chance of seeing me. I had told him if this continued, I would no longer allow him to crash there. At one point, after avoiding him for a few days, Bob really started to come out of his shell. He cornered me screaming, "I'm sick and tired of being rejected by you. It's not happening anymore." Now I was scared. I never saw him as a threatening individual before, just a goofy character. I asked him to leave and he was no longer welcome. He refused. He said by law, he was required a 30 days notice to be evicted. When I spoke with the police, they understood my situation, but explained he'd either have to be evicted or I'd have to get a restraining order. I filed the restraining order, which they immediately granted me, but he chose to ignore it. Once he left my home, I locked all doors and windows. When he returned, I showed him the order, to which he replied, "I'm not leaving." I tried calling the police every time he showed up, but by the time they'd get there, he was gone. There were shoe prints on that door and cracks from all the attempts he made to force it open. It never shut correctly after those attempts, and they were never able to officially serve him because they supposedly couldn't find him. I honestly believe they tried once, then gave up. I provided them with his plates, friends' addresses where he'd stayed, previous employment, everything needed. I'd stay up late, hear in his vehicle, it was very loud and easily identified, slowly drive by my home, staring at me, day and night. At one time, he even hid behind my front door, had a mutual friend knock, then jumped out, shoved the door open, and entered. Even went as far to message my young, underage nephew who he met maybe one time on Facebook to try and gain sympathy and convince him to get me to change my mind, crossing even more obvious boundaries. It was a living nightmare. Eventually, he moved on to his next obsession, and I was somewhat at peace. Several months later, he was on our local news for attempting to slit his ex-girlfriend's throat, and beating her until she was unconscious, until a neighbor brushed over and he fled. All I could think was how that could have been me. When I was 18, almost 10 years ago, I had a phone call that completely changed my life. I got woken up at almost 6 a.m. by an unknown number. I figured it was my boyfriend, now husband, since his phone number usually showed up as the famous unknown number. He usually called me before going to work at around 7:30 a.m., but sometimes he'd call me at 6ish if he wanted to talk to me while waking up. I answer, he says what's up, and I'm still half asleep but start talking. He tells me he has a little problem and that he wants to see me. Being 18 and the fact that I started dating him recently, I also was down for this. He tells me how he absolutely loved seeing me last weekend and how good I looked. He basically described what we had done during the weekend. If I remember properly, his parents weren't home for the weekend and we had the house and the car to drive around. And we had lots of fun obviously, and how much he loved some of the things I did to him. I replied and I was more and more awake and we were having a really good time. Then I noticed it was almost 7 a.m., time where he usually takes a shower, eats, and gets ready to go out the door. And I basically ask him, so this is fun and all, but aren't you going to get ready for work? He replied with, no, I think I'll skip work today. How about I come over? Now the thing is, by then I was pretty awake, and although the voice that was talking to me was very similar to my boyfriend's, something threw me off. My boyfriend doesn't say, no like this guy does. Besides, I knew that unless he was sick, my boyfriend would never skip work because he was scheduled on his shifts and missing his shift was a big deal that could get him fired. I kind of froze. He noticed it, so he said, oh babe, you're right, I should start getting dressed. So you want me to come over? By then I swear that his voice was back to my boyfriend's voice and I just felt silly. So what if he wanted to skip a day at work? Maybe he just wanted to see me. So I tell him, yeah, sure, come over, it will only be us here. He replied, great. Then he asked, where's your house? The last time I checked, I'm pretty sure my boyfriend knows where I live. He had been coming over for weeks now. I laugh it off and tell him, ha, you know where it is. That's when he laughed, and his laugh was absolutely not my boyfriend's laugh. I instantly ask him, "You're not my boyfriend's name, are you?" He said, "Can you just hang on please? I need to go grab something." Meanwhile, I get a text from my boyfriend. I figured that maybe this is just a sick joke. Maybe he coordinated it perfectly. Maybe he's sick and his voice doesn't sound the same. The text from my boyfriend said, "At the subway, going to work now, love you." I texted him saying, "Why are you texting me? We are talking right now." At which point my actual boyfriend called. He was very confused at first and figured someone had hacked into his MSN. When I told him it was by phone, he reassured me that he absolutely did not call me and that whoever it was not him. He had to go as the subway train was there, but that he will call as soon as he was at work. Then the other guy called back, I picked up and I asked him, "Who are you? What do you want?" I pretty much went crazy on him. He said that his name was Mike, that we had met a long time ago, which was impossible because my phone number was fairly recent, and that he just wanted to have fun, that he didn't know I had a boyfriend. I asked him how did he know that I was wearing and what did we do and how he got my phone number. He just said, "Where are you? Why don't we meet?" At which point I hung up. He called again, I didn't answer. Within minutes, I had called my mom to tell her what happened. She told me to change my phone number and not to stay home alone. I changed my phone number right away. I also alerted local police. They opened a file, but nothing ever came out of it. I still wonder how he knew what we did and what I was wearing. My boyfriend swore at the time he would never let any of his friends know all that, but his parents' house did have lots of windows and we weren't exactly careful. So Mike, let's never meet again. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This happened while I was in college 5 years ago. I was a transfer student and was 21 at the time. I was set up to be living in a building that was for students 21 or older and moved in a week and a half before classes began. This school was in northern Michigan, so when I first arrived, campus was dead. I mostly kept to myself, but was friendly with a few people in my building, namely one guy named Khalil, an exchange student from Lebanon. He seemed nice enough, though there was a distinct language barrier, so things were easily lost in translation. Our RD and RA, resident director, resident assistant, made everyone who had moved in have a meeting to go over basic rules and whatnot. At the end of the meeting, as I'm leaving the rec room, Khalil suddenly puts his arm up on the wall in front of me, almost clotheslining me. Caught off guard, I am peeved and creeped out about this. He begins explaining that he would like to be my friend and would like to go out for dinner to get to know me. He worded it oddly, so I wasn't sure if it was just a date or just a friendly invitation, but I attributed it to his bad English. Like an idiot, I felt cornered physically and socially. I am awful with confrontation and could be too nice, so I agreed. He meant right then and there, however, and said, "I will get us a taxi and we'll go now." 10 minutes later, we're getting into this taxi, and as I'm entering, I feel this sense of dread. I think, I barely know this guy, and Hudson's, the restaurant, is a couple miles away and we will be stranded out there with this stranger if it gets weird. As we drive, my guard rises higher and higher. He wants to know everything about me, and is throwing questions rapid fire. My age, dating history, physical preferences in men, religion, family, everything. I am thinking, this is going to be really awkward, and wanted the night to be over before we even get to the restaurant. At the restaurant, we both look at the menu for a bit. The waiter comes and takes my order, salad, small and quick to eat, and then the waiter asks what Khalil wants. He says, "Oh no, I'm not hungry, I just want to watch her eat." What? Why would you ask me for dinner if you weren't hungry? And why did you just want me to eat? I was horrified. All of my family was in the lower peninsula of Michigan, 8 hours away. I had no friends up here. The only local numbers I had were of my RA and RD. I speed eat all of my salad as Khalil watches me, now talking about himself. He tells me about how he has anger problems and is looking for a woman to help calm him, but still be a submissive traditional wife. I am trying to hide the horror and uneasiness as I nod and eat. He continues explaining how he was known for his temper back home, and how his brothers have stopped him from doing awful things. At this point, red flags blinding my vision. It's time to end this. I finish my food and tell him to get a taxi back to campus. I intentionally sat in front of the taxi. I wasn't allowing the possibility of physical contact. When we get to the campus, we get in the building and I say a quick thank you and haul back to my room. Door locked, I get into my sweats and try to chalk it up to a weird experience and vow to avoid Khalil from then on. Around 12:30 a.m., I hear a knock on my door. I was watching Netflix and took out my earbuds to make sure I was hearing right. The knocking continues. Not a courteous knock knock knock, but a closed fist pounding. I am petrified and making as little noise as possible. Get to the door and look out the peephole. I see Khalil. My room is at the very end of a long hallway. All rooms around me empty at this point, with the door outside of my room leading to a parking lot surrounded by woods. Knowing how isolated I was, I slink away from the door, making zero noise just waiting for the knocking to stop. About a minute later, it stops. He growls, "I know you're in there. I will wait." My eyes widen in horror. I felt a mixture of rage and panic. but decided that confronting him then wouldn't be smart. So I quietly watched Netflix until I fall asleep. I have no idea how long he waited out there. The next morning, when I finally emerged from my room, I found a couple of pages taped to my door. 3 handwritten pages from Khalil, explaining his feelings for me and his intentions of making me his wife. I went straight to my RA and explained everything that happened. She agreed to meet with Khalil herself, to explain to him how inappropriate he was being, and to tell him to leave me alone. He didn't. Notes kept coming. He came to my door dozens of times a day, and I became pretty much trapped in my room hiding from this psycho. It lasted for 8 days, but classes began and Khalil disappeared. I was told he dropped out and moved back to Lebanon. I found it eerie how he just vanished. Had he come here solely to find a wife, I'll never know. But Khalil, let's not ever meet again. It was the middle of the afternoon and I was home from college for the weekend, driving home from an auto shop, having just picked up my car after some repairs. It suddenly started making a loud grinding noise. My car was very old, things were always going wrong, so I pulled into a shopping center parking lot and called my parents for advice on whether I should take it back to the shop or get a tow. I know very little about cars. My mom told me she would come and meet me at the shopping center and we'd figure it out. At this point, my phone battery was also dying, so my phone shut off after the call. As I was hanging out in the parking lot, a guy pulled over on the street in front of me, rolled down his window, and asked me for directions. I did my best to direct him, but instead of taking off, he then pulled into the parking lot and got out of his car. I found that a bit weird. It was broad daylight, I was in front of a shopping center, cars were driving by constantly, it's not like it was nighttime in an abandoned alley. So the guy started to make what seemed like small talk and I complied, still not understanding what he wanted. He introduced himself and asked what my name was and I offered my first name. He asked what I did. I said I was a student studying art. He asked where I went to school and I told him. He asked how old I was. He made a little more small talk and then I guess seeing that I was a bit more relaxed, he said he was a sculptor and that if I was interested in art, I would love the sculptures he had at his house. He said we would go there right now and look at them. Immediately that dull alarm in the back of my head got turned way up. I was young and naive, but I knew enough to never ever get in a stranger's car and immediately felt very uncomfortable. Though he knew how old I was, I looked extremely young. I started to put 2 and 2 together. He was getting increasingly more insistent that I get in his car and go to his house. He reached for my arm and at that point everything is a blur. I yelled that I had to go and ran from my car into the nearest store. It was a tiny game store so there weren't really anywhere to hide, but I told the cashier about the guy and asked if I could wait in there until my mom showed up. The cashier assured me the man would not be let in the store and that he and his coworker would keep an eye on me until the man was gone. I also asked them if I could use their phone to call my mom and let her know what was going on since mine had died. I kept watching the guy outside by my car, worried he would try to come in, but as soon as he saw me use the store's phone, he got in his car and took off. I wish the story ended there. The whole encounter really shook me up, but as I reflected on it, I realized, through the questions the man had asked, he had my first name and exact birth date by asking how old I was and getting my birthday. He also knew where I went to school, though thankfully it was several hours away from my hometown where I encountered the man. I asked a friend of mine what kind of info he could get based on what he had, and much to my distress, my friend showed me he was able to find out my full name, my phone number, and my home address with the info I had given the man. I felt like such an idiot. I had always been taught to be wary of strangers and not give them personal info, and I was baffled by how easily this guy had gotten personal info out of me just by pretending to have a casual conversation. Nothing happened for a few weeks and I started to stress less, and stopped thinking about the encounter, and stopped worrying about running into the man again. Then one early morning my cell phone rang. The number was restricted. I answered. There was heavy breathing on the phone, but no reply. I hung up. It happened again the next morning. This time a man answered, asking, "What are you doing right now?" I said I was trying to sleep. "What are you wearing?" I immediately hung up. The calls continued. The next time I picked up, I told him if he called again, I'd call the police. I got a few more calls from a restricted number after that, but stopped answering, and eventually they stopped. I'm still not sure if the calls were from the man I met in the parking lot, but it seemed likely. It was just too much of a coincidence they started after that encounter. I spent a good year being afraid of that man. I still can't believe how foolish I was giving him info about myself so easily, and it was an important lesson in how smooth and sneaky creeps can be, and now I'm much more careful about what I say to strangers. I still don't know what he had planned if I had actually been foolish enough to get in his car, but I'm very glad I never found out. When I was 18, I worked in my college's residence building at the front desk and I think I almost got assaulted or murdered. You be the judge. During the summer, the building operated as a hotel, so 2.5 floors were hotel rooms and half of the 3rd floor were student rooms. The whole building operated with the hotel swipe key system that was pretty outdated, and all the doors were powered by 4 AA batteries. If the batteries died, there was a decently lengthy process to replace them and reprogram the door. A dark-haired guy came to the front desk from inside the building while I was working an overnight shift at around 1 or 2 a.m. and said he left his key card in his room. I made him a new one and made my first error of the night. Hotel guests could have as many room keys remade as they wanted, hypothetically. Students, however, were supposed to be given a temporary key card and charged $2 to be returned when theirs is located. I gave him a new key for his room and asked if he was a student or hotel guest, and he replied student. At this point, I should have checked our system to charge his account, but I was caught up doing administrative duties and forgot. I used to trust people way too easy at this job but quickly learned not. Later on the night, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m., he came to the desk again and said he couldn't get into his room. I asked if he just forgot his key again and he said no, the door wasn't working. I asked if the light was coming on when he swiped his card and he said no, so I figured the batteries were dead. I told him I'd changed the batteries and I went up to his room with him. He asked me for my name and I told him. He didn't tell me his. I opened the room door manually with the master key and I told him I'd have to prop it open while I worked on the back panel to replace the batteries. He said, no, it's okay, I'll close it, and closed and deadbolted the door locked. Really weird, but I tried not to think about it. I had changed the batteries on plenty of other doors by this point, and some students were iffy about having their doors propped open for their room to be on display for anyone walking by. He also had a really thick accent and I thought he might be an international student since we had a lot of students from other countries where English was not their first language. I gave him the benefit of the doubt and thought maybe it was also just a language barrier issue. At this point though, I really felt like something was wrong, but I tried to ignore it so I didn't freak him out. While I was trying to focus on fixing the door as quickly as possible, he kept trying to entice me to go further into the room, saying his bed was broken and he needed me to take a look at it, there was something underneath it that needed to be fixed, etc. He held out a little gold house key and said, I have a key, go get it, and threw it under the bed. He said there was a leak under the fridge. He just kept trying to get me down on the ground, throwing random problems at me. Obviously, I told him no. I'd send maintenance up in the morning to take a look at it if anything was broken. I had my back to him and he asked me if I would take off my glasses. I said, no, I need them to see. His tone of voice changed. In the most steady, chilly manner, he said, Ella, it's okay, you could take them off. And from behind me, he reached around and tried to take off my glasses. I swatted his hand away and, trying to remain composure, said, no thanks, I need to keep them on, even though he was creeping me out. I didn't want to be rude to him. I didn't want to get in trouble if he complained about me, or risk upsetting him and having him yell at me. I got up to grab something from the door repair kit and undid the door deadbolt and opened it up in the process. He jumped toward the door to close it again and told me to keep it closed. I told him no, I had to open it to start reprogramming it from the front. While I held the door open with my foot and grabbed something from the door repair kit, he started playing with the little wispy hairs at the top of my forehead and tried to touch my shoulder. I swatted him away again and asked him not to touch me and focus on getting out of there. He once again tried getting me to follow him into the bedroom, saying the bed was broken, and I went as far as the door frame to see if I could spot any actual problem with his bed. This is when I realized that he had nothing in his room. No dishes in the kitchen, no shower curtain in the bathroom, no sheets in the bed, nothing. This wasn't his room. My brain once again went back to the international student theory, thinking he had just arrived today and hadn't got a chance to buy anything yet. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. I fiddled around with the door for a few more seconds before announcing that it was fixed, and quickly gathered the door kit and left. Before I had reached the elevator, he came back out without his shoes on to follow me. He tried to get back in to get his shoes and called out, Ella, the door isn't fixed, you need to come back. I went back and opened the door manually and told him if the door was broken, I'd have to send up maintenance to fix it in the morning. I knew he was going to follow me to the elevator again, so I closed the door behind me once he went inside and ran down the stairwell as fast as I could. When I got to the front desk, I checked the computer and saw that the room he was in was supposed to be empty. It wasn't a student room or a hotel room. I locked myself in our back office and called campus security. He came down a few minutes later and went behind the desk. I yelled at him to get on the other side and wait, now that I knew he wasn't a resident. He tore the corner off a slip of paper I had sitting on the desk and drew a flower on it, then put it back on top of my papers. When security arrived, he ran back up to the empty room and tried convincing them he lived there so he wouldn't have to leave. He kept showing them his key, which I decided to work on the door again somehow. They escorted him back downstairs and came to ask me if he really did live there. Obviously he didn't, that's why I called you guys crying and terrified. He kept interjecting to argue that he did live there, but couldn't even recall his room number when asked. Security asked him for a student card and he couldn't produce it, so they told him he would have to leave if he couldn't prove he lived there. While they were grabbing his information, I listened from the office and could immediately tell he was lying. The phone number he gave was just a bunch of random numbers. The name he gave was prefixed by, as if he was trying to think of a name. When they asked him for his address, he just said, across the street. One security guard asked if he lived in the apartments across the street and he said yes, but couldn't tell them what the building number was. He said his apartment number was 1200, but I moved into that building a few months ago later and apartment 1200 doesn't exist. When security asked what his purpose was to be sneaking into a room, he just kept up the ums and the uhs and saying he didn't know. They'd ask, "Were you trying to see a friend? Do you know anybody who lives here? Were you here to hurt somebody?" And he kept fidgeting and saying, "I don't know, no reason, I was just here." At one point he tried to tell them he was my friend, at which point I poked my head out of the office to say that I literally had never seen him before that night. He left. We didn't call the police because he didn't actually do anything, but it was still unsettling. Later on, it dawned on me how he figured out that the room was vacant. One of the housekeepers had been using it as her personal break room. A few days later, a housekeeper came to the desk and told me they found the door deadbolted open, the TV on, and a housekeeper inside watching TV. She must have forgotten to close the door when she left for the night, and when the creep let himself into the building, he found out. I never saw him again, and to this day, I still have no clue what he was doing there. I haven't worked there since last winter, and overnight shifts still give me the creeps. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.